Chapter 785, Trissy's Discovery 100 Buckland Street, in a corner of the garden in Portland Moment's residence. The many ants and worms that were gathering there slowly dispersed as the cold, creepy sensation faded. That person with extraordinary powers likely doesn't have any experience. With her goal achieved, Hazel nodded indiscernibly before turning around briskly and strolling through the garden. She wasn't in a rush to return as she enjoyed the crimson moonlight, the cold air, and the faint flowery scent. After a long while, Hazel stopped her stroll and left the garden, entering the hall on the first story. At this moment, apart from the guests still playing Texas Hold'em, many ladies and gentlemen had bid farewell. Moments after Hazel found her mother, Ma'am Rihanna, she saw her father, Member of Parliament Mocked, and a few other gentlemen walking down as they conversed with lively expressions. "Are you ready to head home? You have to visit a very important guest tomorrow morning." As Rihanna gestured for her daughter to come close, she walked towards her husband and greeted the others with a smile. Mocked nodded and said, "I would have loved to try another of Portland's cigars if not for that matter." Rihanna swept her gaze to Willis, Dwayne Dantes, and company, and she asked in passing, "Gentlemen, what are you talking about? It sounds interesting." Mocked turned his body to the side and said with a smile, "Dwayne said that he encountered ghosts when he was in the southern continent. He and his companions suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and found themselves unable to open their eyes. Their bodies were heavy, as though someone was pressing on them. They used a great deal of strength before escaping such a state and left their beds. However, they discovered their rooms were extremely cold. You might not know this, but East Balam's weather is hot most of the time." Then, Dwayne and his companions each held double-barreled hunting rifles and stood guard the entire night. They frantically left the town after the sun rose. After hearing that, Ma'am Rihanna looked at Dwayne Dantes with piqued interest. "Is that true? Do ghosts really exist?" Klein shook his head with a smile. "That I'm not sure of. Perhaps my companions and I had just experienced a harrowing adventure and our bodies and minds weren't in the best of conditions. This might have resulted in all kinds of problems." The stories he told were sourced from one of Anderson's experiences. Back when the strongest hunter of the Fog Sea was exploring a temple in the primitive forest, he chanced upon a specter, creating a large-scale breakout overnight. Ghosts. Hazel turned her head to look towards the garden as the corners of her mouth curved up slightly before she held back. She didn't say a word as she quietly listened to her parents bidding the rest of them farewell before returning home together. Late at night, Hazel, who had changed into a sleeping gown, walked to the balcony and stood behind a gap in the curtains. She looked towards the sewer manhole on Buckland Street. As she looked at it, her face gradually turned pale as though she had recalled an experience filled with pain and horror. She forced herself to retract her gaze, took 2 deep breaths, and turned around to walk to her bedside. During this process, she bit gently on her lip and muttered silently, "That was likely a wraith. Definitely. I need items or charms in the sun domain." While Hazel was looking at the manhole, Klein was also doing the same. "It's been days. I wonder how well that demoness, Trissy, has recovered and whether she has left or not. Thankfully, after Hazel was given a scare by me, she hasn't dared to approach the manhole." Klein's gaze swept the iron-black street lamps as he nodded slightly. He opened the iron cigar case and made his wraith marionette appear within the full-body mirror. He had already decided to send Senor down the sewers to check the area to confirm Trissy's condition. He didn't want that demoness to cause any trouble. Furthermore, the sewers were just physically too close to his identity as Dwayne Dantes. Klein didn't wish for Trissy to be in the vicinity any longer, wishing that she could recover soon and take action. That would prompt her to leave Buckland Street. Having Admiral of Blood Senor appear every once in a while would fulfill the character setting I previously created. It doesn't live nearby, and because the sewers contains a secret, it often wanders around in search of it. As Klein was thinking, he made the marionette in the ancient triangular hat leap onto the street lamp's surface before passing through the manhole cover in a wraith form, quickly approaching the hidden fork where Trissy hid herself at. Before reaching the dead end, Senor, who had night vision, could see that the area was empty. She's already recovered and left? Klein thought as he made the marionette continue forward, stopping at the spot where Trissy was previously sitting. He discovered that the place was tidied up. Not only was the ground not muddy and moist, even the moss on the walls and corner had vanished. There isn't any leftover food either. That fellow became a germaphobe after becoming a woman? No, perhaps he was like that to begin with. With Senor's vision, Klein surveyed the area and determined that either Trissy hadn't left, or she hadn't left for more than a day, otherwise, it was impossible to maintain the cleanliness of the place. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, light footsteps sounded into the wraith's ear. Under his control, Senor retraced his steps and wasn't surprised to see Trissy in her black dress. This demoness had her luscious black hair cascading down, unlike peers her age who had different hairstyles. It was simple and neat. Matched with her pale face that had just recovered some of its ruddiness, Trissy looked like a dreamy flower that was silently blooming in the night. As expected of a demoness. Thankfully, there's a marionette in between us, otherwise, would just end up staring at her. Heh, a dead person won't be enticed. No matter how charming a demoness is, there's no way they can make the deceased climb out of a tomb like a zombie. Klein lampooned as he looked at Trissy, who had a blank expression but was secretly wary, having released the invisible threads. Where did you go? Trissy pricked up her brows and said, would you like to relieve yourself where you sleep? I thought a demoness wouldn't need to use the washroom. Klein gave a self-deprecating comment and made Senor chuckle. Are you referring to pissing and shitting? He had deliberately made the marionette say such words, as it matched Admiral of Blood's persona of a boorish pirate. Trissy indiscernibly frowned and said, is there anything else? Senor didn't continue on the topic as he said, you look like you've almost recovered. Trissy smiled. Not bad. I'll be leaving tomorrow. She paused as she slightly narrowed her slender eyes. To be frank, I doubt whether you're the real Admiral of Blood at times. Of course it's real. You should ask if he's alive or dead. With his interest piqued, Klein made Senor ask, why do you say that? Trissy's gaze swept over the wraith's face and said, it's said that Admiral of Blood is someone who indulges in his desires, and he has no resistance towards beautiful females and males. Yet, I don't see any sparks of desire when you face me. I believe the real Admiral of Blood would have added the condition of doing something I wouldn't want to in the agreement. Klein deliberated for 2 seconds and made Senor give a self-deprecating smile. I'm afraid of finding myself lost to pleasure and ending up being controlled by you. Trissy's expression instantly changed. This was indeed one of the reasons why she had raised the topic. To a demoness of pleasure, beyonders who habitually indulged in their desires were natural prey. Klein actively ignored the topic and made the marionette say, you're seeking out the target tomorrow? Very clearly, the Royal Guard captain knows you and knows what you look like. After all, you were arranged by them to be by Prince Edisac's side. Klein silently added. Trissy lowered her head and looked at her toes before chuckling. Rest at ease, I have the perfect plan. As she spoke, she turned her body sideways and casually looked deep into the sewers. If you set off from here, at the end of the 6th left fork is a hidden passage. It has signs of prolonged human activity. I discovered it while walking around in the past few days. I believe it has something to do with that girl, right? It's also the reason why you're here. Hidden passage? Klein didn't confirm or deny it. He made Senor smile and say, did you discover anything? Trissy shook her head. There was nothing at all. Perhaps only a certain pathway, or someone with a specific item, can find the clues. A marauder's intuition, or something on Hazel's person? Klein didn't make Senior continue on the topic as he pressed his hand to his chest and bowed with a smile. Since you've recovered, I can be at ease. The moment he said that, he suddenly vanished. Trissy focused her eyes into a stare, but it was to no avail. Only when the invisible thread she had released was hit by a breeze did she retract her gaze, confirming that Admiral of Blood had really left. At that moment, Klein had brought the wraith back to the manhole without attempting to explore the spot which Trissy had mentioned. There were 3 reasons for his decision. First, it had exceeded 100 meters. Second, he suspected that he wouldn't find anything since he wasn't from the Marauder pathway, nor did he have the corresponding items. Third, Trissy was still around. Furs woke up naturally on a Sunday morning as she got up to wash up. As she chewed on a fresh piece of toast, she retrieved a stack of items from her mailbox. As she walked to the coffee table with a cup of coffee on it, she casually flipped through the items and discovered a reply letter she had been looking forward to. Throwing down the papers, bills, and other letters, Furs tore open the envelope. Teacher is already in Backlund? Furs quickly read through the letter as she muttered in surprise. At the same time, she saw the toast in her mouth plunge to the ground. Chapter 786, Accounting Fraud Hat Trick in on Sherwood Burrows 22 Hope Street. Just as the attendant at the front desk was about to drink some water, she saw a lady walk in. The lady was about 1.65 meters tall, and she wore a light-colored dress with frilly sides. Her brown curly hair cascaded down as she wore colored glasses. She looked casual, just like someone who had just returned from Desi Bay. She held a dark brown leather suitcase as she unhurriedly walked to the front desk. A lady with extraordinary disposition. Her attire is nice. How I wish I could see what she looks like without her glasses. As a female, the attendant habitually sized up her clothes and accessories. She then heard the lady say in a languid tone, 1 night. A single room. 2 soldi and 8 pence. The attendant gave her the room rate for the day and directly asked, "Do you have any identification documents?" She wasn't too adamant about registering her identity, because the inn had no means of confirming the authenticity of the documents. Yes. The lady put down her dark brown suitcase and took out an identification document from her handbag before passing it to her. Margaret Taylor, the attendant muttered as she registered her before finding a bunch of keys. Room 2012. Thank you. The lady in fashionable attire received the keys, carried the dark brown suitcase, and walked towards the staircase. At this moment, an attendant in a red vest came over. He bowed and asked, "How may I help you?" He immediately cast his gaze on the dark brown suitcase. The lady curled her lips into a smile as she shook her head. "There's no need. It's very light." With that said, she didn't stop as she walked up the stairs and entered room 2012. Only after she closed the door and put down the suitcase did she raise her right hand to her chest, letting out a long sigh of relief. Why do I feel like a psychotic murderer? She was none other than the disguised Furs. There was nothing in her suitcase except for Mr. X's head, which was wrapped in newspapers. The 2 attendants from before probably wouldn't have guessed that a fashionable lady didn't have any clothes, facial products, or makeup in her suitcase, but a cracked, bloody head. If they were to discover that, everyone in the inn would be given a fright. This is source material for a detective novel. Furs calmed her feelings of anxiousness and picked up her suitcase again and opened the door. She observed the corridor and saw no one walking through it. She hurriedly walked out and headed for room 2016 and rapped on the wooden door. Her teacher, Dorian Gray Abraham, was living in the same room he previously used. After sensing someone sizing her up through the peephole, Furs heard the doorknob twist as the gears unlocked. Dorian Gray was dressed in a black suit with very broad shoulders. He looked to the left and right warily before making way, allowing his student to enter. "No one noticed you, right?" Following that, he closed the door and asked cautiously. Furs put down the suitcase and removed the colored glasses that hid half her face. No, I used a fake identity. As a Beyonder in Backlund with rather rich experience as a low-sequence Beyonder, having a few fake identification documents was necessary. Furthermore, she had Zio's expert help in such matters. The only problem was that it was ultimately a fake identity that couldn't stand up to police scrutiny. However, Furs had heard that there were places where real identity documentation could be obtained. Furthermore, they were documents which the police department had a record of, with the pictures swapped. Of course, the price was much more expensive. Dorian nodded gently and silently exhaled. As he got Furs to sit, he brought a chair over and said, "You mentioned that someone is paying to find the direct descendants of the Abraham family at a Beyonder gathering in Backlund? And the goal is to find information on Mr. Dorr?" "Yes, teacher," Furs said nothing but the truth. "I don't know much about the family, so I thought of asking you to see if you knew anything." She hid 2 points, namely the Beyonder gathering being called the Tarot Gathering, and that she long knew that her teacher was a member of the Abraham family. Dorian sat down and drank a sip from a white porcelain teacup. He asked with a calm expression, "Who was the one asking?" "I'm not sure. I can only confirm that it was a woman. She had concealed her appearance. She seemed very powerful and must have quite a strong backing." Furs described her impression of Ma'am Hermit. What she didn't say was that this woman had close ties with Queen Mystic Bernadette. Dorian Gray pondered for a few seconds before saying, "I don't know much either. All I know is that Mr. Dorr is the ancestor of the Abraham family. He vanished during the War of the Four Emperors. You can try using this piece of information to get some of the bounty." "Mr. Dorr is the Abraham family's ancestor?" Mr. Dorr, who made the Abraham family suffer the curse of the full moon, causing many members to lose control, is actually the Abraham family's ancestor? Furs was alarmed. Having already learned some of the problems of the Abraham family from Mr. Fool, she couldn't believe that the cause of all of this was the source of the bloodline. Does Mr. Dorr not know the consequences of his actions? Furs muttered silently as she couldn't help but frown. Dorian Gray noticed his student's abnormal reaction as he asked, somewhat puzzled, "Is there a problem?" "Oh no, I didn't manage to hide my expression." Furs deliberated and said, "I just don't understand. It's been more than 1,000 years, so apart from the Abraham family's direct descendants, who would wish to gather information on Mr. Dorr and why? Perhaps they're trying to find Mr. Dorr. Ah, right. Queen Mystic is Emperor Roselle's daughter, and Mr. Dorr has appeared in Emperor Roselle's diary. Therefore, the Queen is trying to find Mr. Dorr to figure out the truth of the past. That's normal. However, Mr. Dorr vanished in the War of the Four Emperors, more than 1,000 years before Emperor Roselle's era. How did they manage to contact each other? Could it be that Emperor Roselle could also hear the full moon ravings? I remember Mr. Dorr making a remark that Mr. Dorr might be calling for help. If that's the case, it's really. As an author, Furs was momentarily at a loss for words to describe her feelings. Dorian revealed a wry smile and said, "Certainly, I'm also puzzled about this problem. Remember to tell me if you find the answer." Furs didn't harp on this matter, afraid that Dorian Gray would notice anything amiss. She then said, "Teacher, why did you suddenly come to Backlund?" Dorian smiled and picked up a cigarette as he raised it to his nose to give it a whiff. Without lighting it, he said, "I happen to have some matters that need me to be in Backlund. I also decided to check on your digestion progress." In fact, he had been alarmed by Furs's letter. He couldn't believe that anyone in the world would still be asking about Mr. Dorr. One had to know that even the Abraham family had given up such attempts. He was the only one who kept at it, teaching students on his own accord. This also made him recall a prophecy that was passed around within the family: the Abrahams were increasingly approaching their destruction. When he connected the two matters together, he rushed over to Backlund to confirm his student's situation. He wished that she could advance as soon as possible, leaving some hope for the Abraham family. I just grasped the various astrological knowledge, Furs replied, feeling a little guilty. Due to her lack of money, she hadn't bought the high-quality crystal ball needed by an astrologer. To not continue on this topic, Furs began asking Dorian Gray about the acting principles needed for astrologer, obtaining advice such as, astrology isn't all-powerful. Towards the end, Furs glanced at the dark brown suitcase beside her and said, "Teacher, there's one more matter." "What is it?" Dorian leaned back into his chair as he leisurely drank a mouthful of black tea. Furs followed the script she had prepared and said, "After knowing that Louis Veen betrayed the organization, inflicting a great deal of harm upon all of you, I've always had the thought of finding him and exacting revenge for all of you." "Give up that thought." Dorian sat up straight. "Even if you have Lamino's travels, you are no match for him, much less able to kill him. I'm very glad that you have such thoughts, but there's no need to take unnecessary risks. I'm definitely not able to do it alone." Furs mumbled silently before saying, "I got to know a very powerful bounty hunter. I spent about £10,000 to seek his help." She wasn't able to estimate the cost of the job, so she had used the price that Miss Audrey paid when previously entrusting them to kill the Intis ambassador. That might be a cheat. Louis Veen is likely a traveler, and he has the support of the Aurora Order. Dorian didn't hold any hopes of any bounty hunter being Louis Veen's match when he heard his student say, "He has already succeeded." Cough. 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 Dorian choked on his saliva as he broke out into a fit of coughs. He dropped the teacup to the ground, but it bounced up like magic, firmly landing on the coffee table. "He has given me Louis Veen's head." Furs held up the dark brown suitcase and opened it, taking out the spherical object which was wrapped in newspapers. With the newspapers unfolded bit by bit, Dorian saw that face he would never forget. The smug smile on Louis Veen's face back when he attacked the Abraham family's headquarters was gone. His head was covered in cracks, as though it had been glued together piece by piece. It was gruesome, filled with pain and despair. As an astrologer, Dorian Gray's spiritual intuition told him that it was undoubtedly Louis Veen's head. "Good, very good," Dorian muttered in excitement before looking up at his student. "Who was the bounty hunter? I can't imagine Backlund having such a powerful bounty hunter." Furs hesitated for a moment before saying, "Gehrman Sparrow." Chapter 787, Dorian's Warning. Gehrman Sparrow. Dorian felt the vessels on his forehead pulse when he heard that as he held his hands together, tensing up without realizing it. Situated in Pritz Harbor, he inevitably learned of the various news at sea, both actively and passively, knowing far more than the residents in Backlund who relied on the newspapers. In recent months, he often heard from different channels of information about Gehrman Sparrow. From killing Steele Mavady to severely injuring Vice Admiral Aylmont Tracy, to successfully hunting Admiral of Blood Senior, all these stories were colored with mania. He left the sea and came to Backlund? He hasn't changed his trait of craziness. Dorian held back the horror and wariness that subconsciously rose in his heart as he looked at his student and said in a deep voice, "It's best that you minimize your communication with that bounty hunter. He's bound to get into big trouble one day, and it wouldn't take long for that to happen. Teacher is indeed experienced and has great acumen." He instantly saw through Mr. World's intrinsic nature. "Unfortunately, I'm already a member of the Tarot Club, so it's impossible not to communicate with him." Furs adjusted her state of mind and sincerely nodded. "Yes, teacher." Dorian composed himself and once again looked at his former student and current enemy, Louis Veen. However, this traveler could no longer speak. He didn't even have an iota of spirituality left. After a few seconds of silence, Dorian leaned back slightly and looked at Furs. "You mentioned paying £10,000 for the job?" He wasn't aware of Firz's financial situation, other than knowing that his student was a best-selling author who likely earned quite a bit from her royalties. Furthermore, she seemed to be doing quite well in the few Beyonder circles with transactions that rewarded handsomely. Therefore, it wasn't too surprising or unacceptable that she could save up £10,000. Furze fidgeted, feeling a slight guilty conscience as she said, "Is it too expensive?" She deliberately asked a question in order to hide the fact that she had mentioned a fake number, so as to show that she didn't have much experience in such matters. Dorian shook his head. "No, it's too cheap. It's so cheap that I suspect whether Gehrman Sparrow has other motives." As a member of the Abraham family which had suffered numerous setbacks, he often maintained a relatively high level of wariness. In the professional terminology of various clubs and gatherings, that's called a membership fee. Furze lampooned as she frankly said, there were other conditions, including everything on Louis Vine's person belonging to him, as well as the requirement of me providing him help. Also, I promised that if he's in need of cash in the future, I will compensate him an additional £3,000. That's reasonable, but just barely. Dorian nodded gently and said, usually, assassinating Louis Vine who had the Aurora Order backing him would cost at least £30,000. And if there are other situations, the price will be higher. Back then, Mr. World had used demigod powers recorded in Lamino's travels. He probably encountered something else. An Aurora Order saint? Having had an edifying experience exerted on her by the Tarot Club, Furze wasn't unfamiliar with the Aurora Order's structure. She didn't hide her frown as she said, "From the looks of it, it's indeed a little abnormal. Perhaps he's in desperate need of cash." Dorian thought and said, "Perhaps he cares more about Louis Vine's Beyonder characteristic. To the Beyonders of other pathways, it can be forged into a rather useful mystical item as long as he finds a suitable artisan." Dorian paused for 2 seconds before adding, "There's no need to worry about that. Just stay away from him in the future." Perhaps he had long targeted Louis Vine, and he was just using the information you provided to carry out the assassination while still getting an additional bonus. Dorian didn't continue on the topic as he took out a fist-sized pure crystal ball from his pocket. It's made of star crystal, and it can effectively raise your astromancy. The light shone in from outside the window as resplendent waves surfaced within the crystal ball. Without waiting for Furze to reject, Dorian chuckled. "Louis Vine is my enemy. The payment used to get rid of him should be paid by me. I don't have that much cash at the moment, and I can only use some items to deduct from the payment." "No, there's no need." Furze shook her head, partially genuine, but partially in contradiction to her will. It was genuine because she only wanted to seek revenge for her teacher back when she thought of getting rid of Louis Vine without considering the possible reward she could later receive. It was in contradiction to her will because she couldn't reject the reward. Dorian said with a stern expression, "Do you wish for me to be ashamed and uneasy? Don't worry. I still have quite a bit of wealth." Furze nodded in response. "All right then," Dorian smiled once again. "Also, I've brought you the scribe potion formula. You can gather the corresponding ingredients as you digest the astrologer potion." "Heh, I'll prepare one of the main ingredients for you, the brain of an Asman. You'll have to rely on yourself for the rest." An Asman was said to be a monster that existed in ancient times. It looked like an unprotected human brain that could fill a room. Not only could it create terrifying illusions, but it could also make its attackers die from their own attacks. As he spoke, Dorian took out a yellowish-brown goatskin and passed it to Furze. Furze received it in gratitude and quickly scanned the list of main ingredients. 1 complete brain of an Asman, cursed artifact of an ancient wraith. I hope I can gather the remaining ingredients before I finish digesting the astrologer potion. Just as Furze rolled up the goatskin, she saw Dorian take out a pure golden box from his suitcase. After removing the wall of spirituality, Dorian opened the box as he said, "Without the gold enclosing it, the brain of an Asman will constantly affect you, causing you to hallucinate until you lose your mental facilities. Inside the squarish box was a blob of grayish-white, translucent, and wrinkled object. It was about a fifth the size of Louis Vine's head. As expected of a family with a long history. Furs sincerely thanked him once again and received the golden box and skillfully closed it and used a wall of spirituality to seal it. Dorian didn't stop and instead gave an excuse for Furs to stay back. He set up a ritual and summoned the void creature Malmouth, who enjoyed music. He then took out 2 documents from the creature's spherical body. He had prepared the 3 items for Furs when he received the shocking news regarding Mr. Dorr, therefore, he had it on him. These are 2 pieces of property in Backlund. One of them is in Hillston Borough, and the other is in Sherwood Borough. They're in excellent locations and should have a total valuation of about £6,500. The amount you can sell them for will be yours, Dorian said with a smile. Although the Abraham family was in a state of decline, as a former Angel family with a long history, it still had quite a bit of resources, including land, tree farms, property, manors, and mines. However, Dorian only had control over a few, with most of the remainder belonging to the various smaller families. The place I'm renting costs £2,500 and is in an okay district but an average location. What teacher gave me today does add up to about £10,000. Furs couldn't help but sigh inwardly. In the Holy Wind Cathedral, Deep Blue officiant Randall Valentinus looked at the mandated Punisher deacon and said, "Any findings?" The new Backlund archbishop was a middle-aged man with a domineering demeanor. His dark blue hair was thick, and he had large earlobes. His eyes seemed to constantly hide lightning and storms within them. The mandated Punisher deacon standing before his desk was a thin middle-aged man wearing a modified captain's hat. His looks didn't stand out, but there was an anchor tattoo on his neck. The man answered reverently, "Your Eminence, we've already caught some of the members who participated in the gathering. However, they have no idea who the rest are, much less know of the person who assassinated Mr. X. According to their description, the assailant was about 1.6 meters tall and likely female. We can't rule out the possibility that it's a short man." Randall held back his anger and asked, "What do you plan on doing next?" "As we are temporarily unable to know who Mr. X invited to the gathering, and 1.6 meter tall women are common, our plan is to relax our stance on the surface as we target a few suspicious targets and convert those we've caught into informants. Without us exerting any danger, those bunch of lunatics from the Aurora Order will definitely seek out the murderer themselves in order to avenge Mr. X. They'll likely do a carpet search, and this way, not only will we find the assassin, but we can also discover more clues to the Aurora Order," the thin middle-aged man explained in detail. Randall nodded in thought and said, "Roy, when taking action, remember to apply for a Grade 1 sealed artifact. The situation is clear that the Aurora Order has at least a saint in Backlund. And the assassin's strength is greater than the typical Sequence 5 Beyonder, and they similarly have a demigod backing them." "Yes, Your Eminence." Roy Wellesley struck the left side of his chest with his right fist. "Dwayne, you often exceed my expectations. It hasn't taken you long to finish studying the revelation of Evernight's Book of Wisdom." Inside St. Samuel Cathedral, Bishop Electra closed the Bible in his hands and smiled at the pious tycoon with gray sideburns and deep blue eyes. Klein laughed and replied, "This is expected of a believer. Next up is the study of the letters of the saints?" "Yes, which saint do you wish to begin with?" Electra asked. Klein looked to his sides and chuckled. "Let's do St. Samuel then." Electra wasn't surprised at that as he seriously introduced, St. Samuel was a Backlund archbishop during the fourth epoch of the Trunsoist Empire. He contributed greatly to the spreading of the goddess's faith and entered her divine kingdom before dying, becoming an angel. As he spoke, he flipped to the corresponding letters of the saints. At this moment, Klein's spiritual perception was triggered. He felt a deep sense of evil and diabolical will spread above him. Following that, a cold and quiet feeling extended from underground, leveling everything and restoring the cathedral to its former tranquility. Bishop Electra snapped out of his daze and said to Dwayne Dantes, who didn't seem to detect anything, "Sorry, I just recalled something." Chapter 788, Hidden Passage. "It's fine," Klein replied with a warm smile. Although he didn't seem to notice anything, thoughts were flying through his mind. He began considering what the anomaly that happened during that instant meant. Previously, the keepers would head upstairs along the nearby staircase. It can be preliminary determined that they live there, coinciding with the area where the anomaly happened. The keepers aren't in the best of conditions, so the chances of them losing control are greater than ordinary beyonders, causing them to suddenly release a sense of an evil and diabolical will? And this was suppressed and quelled by the core seal deep behind Cheney's gate? If that's the case, there are two possibilities. 1. The core seal behind Cheney's gate can sense all the anomalies in St. Samuel Cathedral, and then react instinctively. Second, during the keeper's watch over the years, they are constantly corroded by the core seal's powers. In a certain sense, they are a part of it, or they bear the weight of the corresponding traits. Once any abnormalities happen, their bodies will immediately intervene. If it's the former, that means that when I knock a keeper unconscious and replace him, it will easily be detected by the core seal behind Cheney's gate. It will produce an anomaly like before, causing my plan to fail right at the beginning. If it's the latter, I'll definitely be repelled when entering Cheney's gate, even when disguised as a keeper. I need to figure out the problem before coming up with a direct countermeasure. It's really difficult to steal sealed artifacts from the various churches. It's no wonder almost no one is willing to do so. As Klein's thoughts wandered, he superficially paid attention to Bishop Electra's explanation of St. Samuel's experiences and letters that he left behind. When it was almost time, he politely bade him farewell. After returning to 160 Buckland Street, he saw his butler approach just as he handed his hat and cane to Richardson. "Sir, do you plan on holding a ball or banquet next weekend and invite the neighbors?" Walter wasn't using a suggestive tone, but a tone of inquiry. However, Klein knew very well that since his butler had raised the matter, it meant that it was almost time. He nodded gently and said, "Saturday night then. A ball. I'll have to trouble you and Taneja to make the preparations. Is there enough money?" When saying the last statement, Klein looked to his housekeeper. Taneja sternly nodded and said, "There's enough. The various alcoholic beverages in your wine cellar is enough to handle several banquets." When moving into 160 Buckland Street, Klein had handed her £1,000 in cash for the household expenses. From the looks of it, even with the need to replenish fine wine, tea leaves, and coffee beans, it wasn't something that could be spent in a month. The gold pound is rather strong after all. Klein nodded and smiled. "Let's not use wine that's too expensive for our first ball. It's common to be reserved in loan." "Yes, sir." Although Walter was very aware of how to run a ball, he still paid serious attention to his employer's instructions. He paused and said, "There are only two things you need to do. First, it's to settle the guest list with our help, thinking up some small talk for each guest, matching the person's corresponding status and experience. Second, it's to order a suit for the ball." How troublesome. When greeting Hazel, can I say that the sewers here are cleaner than the squares in the southern continent? As Klein sighed and lampooned, he nodded slightly. "No problem." Deep into the night, the crimson moon hung high in the sky. The smog which had significantly thinned made Buckland have an additional sense of tranquility. In Dwayne Dantes's master bedroom, Klein set up a ritual to summon himself. He planned on entering the sewers tonight to confirm that Trissy had left. He then planned on heading for the fork she had described, to explore the so-called hidden passageway to see if he could discover anything. Klein didn't have extravagant hopes of gaining anything. He was only worried that the secret hidden in the sewers would pose a hidden risk that would one day explode. This could easily involve Dwayne Dantes who lived nearby, spoiling his plans and stealing the Antigonus family's notebook. On this matter, I can't be an ostrich that buries its head in the sand and pretend not to know anything. I should discover the problem early and destroy what needs destroying or report what needs reporting before it completely erupts. That's the most effective solution. Of course, I also need to be sufficiently careful. I mustn't let my exploration end up lighting a fuse. Klein's spirit body tore out of the candlelight, and with Azek's copper whistle augmenting him, he possessed the physical body of Dwayne Dantes, controlling him to walk to the boundary of the wall of spirituality and sit in the reclining chair. To the external world, it looked as though the tycoon had dozed off reading the papers. Summoning my soul to possess my own body feels different from returning to my body. There's an obvious barrier in between. Klein did a comparison of the experience and floated to his desk, cleaning up most of the items on the altar and leaving behind the candle that maintained his summoning to burn silently. After doing all of this, Klein wore creeping hunger, and with Azek's copper whistle, death knell, and the senior gold coin in possession, he flew out of the master bedroom and left 160 Buckland Street, drilling into the sewers. Just as Klein found himself in the moist and dirty environment, he immediately released Wraith Senior and made his marionette open up a distance from him, turning into the hidden fork where Trissy was previously recuperating. This time, he saw that the clean region in the sewers was already stained with dirt containing signs of rats. From the looks of it, Trissy has really left. Klein, who was following far behind, heaved a sigh of relief. As a spirit body, he didn't need to breathe, nor did he need to walk on the ground. Therefore, he didn't mind how disgusting the sewers were. Senior walked out of the area and continued walking ahead and turned on the 6th left turn. Klein constantly maintained a distance of 50 meters, perfectly acting the role of the person behind the scenes. At the end of the fork was a corroded wall covered in moss. At a glance, there weren't any abnormalities to it. If Trissy hadn't mentioned it, Klein wouldn't have gotten his marionette to observe every inch of the area in detail. A few minutes later, Senior suddenly straightened his back and walked forward, entering the wall. Passing through the rather thick obstacle, Klein's eyes opened up. With the marionette's vision, he saw a half-natural, half-artificial cave. It wasn't more than 1.8 meters high and was about 3 meters wide. The ground was littered with tools like shovels which were wrapped in oilskin and large piles of mud and rubble. Right up ahead were 2 hidden passageways that extended downwards. The left one was about 5 to 6 meters deep, while the one on the right was nearly 10 meters deep. However, nothing seemed to have existed in them, as though they were still being excavated. This was dug up by Hazel? In the day, she's an arrogant lady of high society, and at night, she's an excavator in the sewers? Furthermore, she's moving the dirt and rubble one pail at a time? She was loitering around to find the exact spot, and digging was the subsequent step? That wall must have been a secret door. Klein hid himself at the fork's entrance as he made Senior scrutinize the area. Following that, he made the wraith enter the left passage until he reached a completely sealed-off area. Senior's figure slowly turned faint as it turned incorporeal. In this state, he passed through the soil and explored deeper. But even when reaching the 100-meter limit, he didn't discover anything of use. All he saw were ordinary insects and worms. Klein made the marionette switch directions, swimming in the sea of soil without finding anything. Senior soon returned to the cave from before and entered the right passageway without being affected by any obstacles. There's still nothing. It's not without reason that Trissy determined that it will only work for a particular pathway or being in possession of a certain item. She must have probed the area with the invisible threads of a demoness of pleasure. Unfortunately, I've already lost Tinder. I wonder if the grey fog's aura on me would work. It seems to strongly attract beyonders from the Marauder pathway. Klein silently commented and, using his spirit body state, planned on personally visiting the 2 hidden passageways that Hazel had dug up. However, he curbed his desire because he was now a marionettist. Doing it personally in situations that didn't require it was in violation of the acting principles. It's fine even if I don't use the gray fog's aura. I'll just request to purchase a mystical item from the Marauder pathway during tomorrow afternoon's tarot gathering. It doesn't need to be too expensive. It can just correspond to sequence 8 or 9. That badge from Lenivis is only a signal receiver, not an item of this pathway. While not aware of the exact situation of what's hiding inside, rashly using my spirit body to explore it might result in me attracting a high-sequence monster. Being careful and cautious will forever be a condition for myself. Klein slowly heaved a sigh of relief and retrieved Wraith Senior. He wasn't worried that Hazel would continue coming in the near future. Any person with normal intelligence wouldn't continue coming unless they had the means to deal with the situation from before. Ignoring how Hazel hasn't had any contact with Beyonder circles, even if she has, getting an item from the Sun domain isn't simple. After all, Backlund is the territory of the Church of Storms. I do have something that I don't use often. Can I find an opportunity to sell it to her and then let her use it to harm my marionette? Klein jeered at himself before shaking his head with a laugh. He ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog, vanishing from the sewers. On Monday morning, the bright sunlight tore through the thin clouds, shining onto every corner of Backlund. Emlyn White pulled down on his silk top hat. As he left the carriage and walked to the Harvest Church, he squinted his eyes and mumbled, "What terrible weather. Backlund's worst season is coming soon." He was just about to step onto the stairs when he saw a paperboy approach him, handing him a copy of the Tussock Times. "Sir, today's morning papers." Emlyn wanted to reject it when he discovered a small slip clasped in the middle of the boy's fingers. Emlyn maintained his countenance as he took out a penny and passed it to the boy, receiving the copy of the Tussock Times and the slip. Before entering the Harvest Church, he quickly spread it open and scanned it. "There are clues to the people you are looking for. Please come to the Bravehearts Bar." Chapter 789, Each Person's Monday 9:30 a.m. Backlund Bridge Area, Iron Gate Street, Bravehearts Bar. Emlyn White stood rooted to his spot after he got down from the carriage. He stared ahead in a daze, nearly forgetting to avoid the sunlight. At that moment, the bar's main door was shut with no signs of it opening. As a sanguine who seldom left his home and only went to places like bars at night, Emlyn never expected the bar to be closed in the morning. He had left the Harvest Church in a rush via the transportation system after seeing the paper slip, hoping to obtain any first-hand intelligence. To save time, he even tolerated the cramped environment and stench of the metro. At that moment, Emlyn was somewhat peeved, but he knew that he had made the mistake. All he could do was pull a face and circle around Iron Gate Street to not waste his trip. Just as he was about to approach a rental carriage that stood along the street, he caught sight of a familiar figure from the corner of his eye. The person was wearing a brown rounded top hat and an old coat while carrying a ragged haversack. He was none other than Ian, the underground arms dealer and intelligence merchant. I have quite good intuition. I knew he would appear early." Emlyn was delighted as he stuffed his hands into his pockets and leisurely walked over, blocking Ian's way as he chuckled. "Good morning." Ian looked up and glanced at the handsome man before him, replying in puzzlement, "Good morning, Mr. White. You should have come in the evening." "It seems to be a suitable time now," Emlyn said with a smile, clearly in a good mood. "Ian, why do you always wear the same clothes and outfit every time I see you?" Ian answered without minding the question, "This can make me appear more mature while allowing me to keep a low profile. Of course, the main reason is that I lack money." The final sentence was added with a joking tone. "I look forward to your attire in summer," Emlyn said with a scoff. "I'll take off my coat." As Ian spoke, he took out 2 pieces of paper from his ragged haversack. They were the bounty notices that Emlyn had previously given him. Someone in Eastborough saw this person. He handed over one of the papers to Emlyn, and on it was the name, Argos. Realizing that there really were clues to the primordial moon believers, Emlyn asked in delight, "Where is he?" Ian didn't reply as he looked at him with a silent smile. Experienced, Emlyn immediately took out his wallet and gave £150 to Ian. "That's your reward." Ian smiled and said, "There's still another half to go." "Another half?" Emlyn nearly wanted to let this merchant in front of him know the prowess of a sanguine. This was because an effective clue cost £20, while an exact location cost £150. However, he quickly read between the lines as he asked in pleasant surprise, "Another one was found?" "Yes." Ian handed him the remaining piece of paper in his hand. "While my friend observed Argos and confirmed his residence, it was discovered that he had met with this person named Gallus Kevin. Therefore, I've obtained the residence of the two targets at the same time." "Very good." Emlyn emptied his wallet and gave another £150 to Ian. He was abnormally delighted. He felt that the ancestor and Mr. Fool were blessing him. This was because there were only 5 targets, and he had successfully hunted one. Now, with 2 additional clues, all he needed to do was succeed in order to declare himself victor regardless of what the other sanguine did. Ian seriously counted and checked the notes before saying with a suppressed voice, "Argos is on the 3rd story of the apartment block at Eastborough's 6 Limestone Street, opposite the public washroom. Gallus Kevin is similarly in Eastborough. He stays in the room beside the staircase on the 1st floor at 19 Beluga Whale Street. I will confirm your intelligence. I believe you wouldn't wish to abandon your business for a mere £300. Emlyn nodded gently as he gave a warning. Following that, he chuckled and said, "They were found so easily?" Ian's red eyes darted around slightly as he said, "First, many bounty hunters are my friends. They have many informants in Eastborough. Second, those 2 gentlemen didn't have great disguises. Despite being in Eastborough, they wore very different attire from the people around them. If they were willing to wear more ragged clothes and did more than 12 hours of labor work, I believe they would be hard to find in the messy Eastborough. Is that so? One needs to take note of the difference in environment when hiding oneself." Emlyn muttered silently to himself, feeling as though he had learned a new trick. He didn't plan on heading to Eastborough immediately. This was because even if he took action in the day, it would be very difficult to escape without causing a commotion. It was a rather dangerous act in Backland, as it meant that the mandated punishers or nighthawks might come knocking at the door just after he sneaked back home. Emlyn planned on verifying the situation and taking action between 8 to 9 in the evening after the tarot gathering. The primordial moon believer from before was quite strong. These 2 likely aren't weaker. Although I have confidence, it feels unsafe only relying on myself. As Emlyn considered the problem, he waved his hand and bade Ian farewell. He rode on a rental carriage, heading back for the south side of the bridge. Eastchester County, Stone City. Audrey stood behind a railing, watching the servants placing the items that had been brought from the family castle in suitable spots. The scene was bustling but orderly. "I'll send someone to associate Professor Michel later and tell him that I'll be paying a visit to the Relic Search and Preservation Foundation. I hope that they've obtained some items that have been tainted with beyonder effects." As Audrey's mind wandered, she couldn't help but smile. She was proud of her decision of donating the funds to establish the foundation. When her eyes that were as beautiful as emeralds saw the time on the wall clock, she hurriedly reined in her thoughts and turned to return to her bedroom. Susie was slumped in a corner of the bedroom. Its front paws were crossed, giving it a sense of elegance. In front of it was an opened book. There were dense lines of text written on it. Susie would raise one of her front paws from time to time to flip the page as she read with great seriousness. "Every time I see Susie like that, I feel a little ashamed. Audrey, you mustn't slack off on your education." Audrey encouraged herself in silence as she approached, planning to get Susie to head outside to guard the door. Susie looked up and glanced at Audrey before standing straight up, saying, "I got it." After saying that, it briskly ran out the bedroom without closing the door. "I haven't said anything." Audrey blinked as she softly muttered to herself. She had given such instructions many times. To prevent Susie from detecting that she wanted to be alone in the room from 3 to 3:30 p.m. on Mondays, forbidding humans and dogs from coming close, she had also done similar matters at other times, pretending that there was a gathering, wanting alone time while maintaining an irregular pattern. I have to say that Susie's existence has effectively raised my motivation to learn, as well as how strictly I handle matters. I can't be inferior to a dog. But being better than this dog doesn't seem to be something worthy of praise. Audrey puffed her cheeks with a self-deprecating comment as she sat by her bed, awaiting the beginning of the tarot gathering. 3 p.m. above the gray fog. Dark red figures shot up along the two sides of the long bronze table, materializing into different blurry figures. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool," Audrey's greeted with a cheery voice as she bowed. The other members greeted one after another until the existence at the seat of honor nodded in response. While sitting down, Furs couldn't help but look at Mr. World, wondering what she should use as an opening. Apart from passing on her teacher's reply to Ma'am Hermit, she planned on doing a few matters. 1. She wanted to tell Mr. World that due to the difficulty of the mission, she would pay him more, but it required him to wait. This was because the sale of the houses took time. 2. After brainstorming, she thought of a good way that could earn money and raise her strength. She had gained inspiration from the world's actions: rent out Lamino's travels. When a member needed an item to temporarily raise their combat strength to deal with certain situations, they could rent Lamino's travels from her. The rent could be paid in two forms: cash, which wasn't too expensive, or to record beyond her powers instead. This also meant that the renter had to guarantee that the spellbook was returned with more filled pages. Of course, as the provider, Furs would record useful apprentice powers like door opening, providing the renter with relevant help. A problem that could easily happen in this transaction was that the renter might not return it, but with Mr. Fool witnessing these exchanges in the Tarot Club, Furs believed that no one would be blinded by greed. And the death of the renter was a low-probability event for losing Lamino's travels. But with everyone knowing that they could pray to Mr. Fool in times of danger, death was an even smaller probability. How can there not be any risks when doing business? I will talk to Mr. World about when he will use it so that there won't be any conflicts. Furs retracted her gaze and heard Ma'am Hermit speak. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I have 2 pages of Roselle's diary this time. Ever since contact was made with Queen Mystic, the receiving of diary pages has stabilized in a rather terrifying manner." Klein nodded slightly and chuckled. "Very good." After a brief silence, Catlia conjured 2 yellowish-brown pieces of paper. They leaped into Mr. Fool's palms as if they had tunneled through the spirit world. Klein slowly lowered his gaze at the diary in his hands. December 29th. It's almost a new year again. All the mausoleums have been built. What's done cannot be undone. Chapter 790, The End of the Diary. All the mausoleums have been built. What's done cannot be undone. Klein looked at the diary page in his hand as his thoughts boiled over as ideas kept emerging and shattering. From his point of view, this diary page of Emperor Roselle nearly proved his previous conjectures. He had chosen to forcefully switch to the Black Emperor pathway in his later years, doing so at the cost of going mad to become a Sequence Zero true god. What drove the Emperor to make such a decision? What did he discover that resulted in his agitation, rashness, and loss of composure in the previous diary entry? And compared to back then, his emotions in this diary entry appear calm and composed, but it feels like he is even more extreme. It's hard to imagine what the emperor experienced or encountered in his later years that resulted in him having such an abnormal situation. The madness that angels are embroiled with to begin with, or is it something that had happened to the faith of the believers that kept him anchored, his rationality? If he was normal, shouldn't he hold back a little and strive for certain outcomes before finding an opportunity to devour the hidden sage? Klein instantly thought of many things, but he was unable to find any evidence. And on this page of goatskin, there were only 2 short lines of text, as though it indicated the final diary page of Emperor Rozel's life. The end of the year or the beginning of the new year was the day he was suspected to have perished in the White Maple Palace. An emperor of an era, a transmigrator's last words? Klein sighed silently as he flipped to the goatskin beneath. The diary page didn't have a date, but at the top of the page was a line in Faisak, immediately follows the previous page. The words were written neatly and elegantly, very different from Emperor Rozel's handwriting. It was obvious that it was added by someone else. It's probably a note by Queen Mystic. To indicate that this is the last part of the diary, written after the emperor said that what's done cannot be undone. But why isn't there a date? Klein was deeply puzzled as he read the corresponding content, his gaze freezing up. I believe I'm not the only transmigrator in this world. If there's anyone else who can read my diary, remember to carefully select your Beyonder pathway. Once you choose this, it pretty much confirms your allies and your enemies. I'm unable to give any actual suggestions because I myself can't see the true faces of the 7 deities or those evil gods. This might be partially related to the second blasphemy slate that the ancient organization hides. Unfortunately, I only have a rough idea of the hidden parts, and I'm unable to verify them. Similarly, I don't know what's written on the first blasphemy slate either. A useful warning is to not choose pathways with sequence zeros that are occupied, and also be careful of neighboring sequence zeros and sequence ones. I've suffered tremendously on this aspect. As for what sequence 0 represents, search for my other diary pages if you aren't aware. This page is equivalent to the afterword of my life. If I succeed, I'll be a god, and it will be another story. If I were to fail, there wouldn't be a future. Perhaps, well, you know. Go, my friend who understands my diary, go seek out the secret of transmigration and the truth hidden within. I'll be watching you, if I'm still alive. Finally, let me warn you that you have to remember, be careful of the moon. Klein wasn't surprised about there being more than one transmigrator. After all, he had long known of a senior in the form of Emperor Rozel. He was puzzled about the details that the emperor had used to determine that there wasn't only one transmigrator. This was a very important point, as it held great meaning as to whether there were incomparable problems in his bid to return home. This was like an unknown equation. Without enough examples and conditions, there was no way to obtain the correct answer no matter how he tried to solve it. Only with enough equations could he find the correct answer. The emperor should have written his discoveries on this matter in the previous diary entries. Unfortunately, I have no way of knowing where it is in order to do a targeted search and recovery. Klein silently sighed before considering the other contents in the afterword. The hidden contents in the second blasphemy slate which the Twilight Hermit Order showed? Did they deliberately hide the contents, or did they not actually obtain it? The second blasphemy slate was actually split into 2 parts, with the other half landing in the hands of other factions? My pathway has already been determined. It was selected based on the exclamation found in Emperor Rozel's diary. From the Emperor's afterword, I can be a bit assured. The seer pathway doesn't have a sequence 0 because the mad sequence 1 Zeradal is still alive. And according to the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation, this subdivision part can probably be called the law of incompatibility. If there's a sequence 1, there's no sequence 0. I need to be careful of Zeradal, Mr. Dor, Blasphemer Amon, and Palaz Zoroast, as well as the other sequence 1s who exist in these 3 pathways. What does being careful of the moon mean? Be careful of the primordial moon? That could be said directly. Wait, the Emperor apparently had thoughts of exploring the Crimson Moon before. Could it be that he finally committed himself to do it and discovered something on the moon, which is why he warned other transmigrators to be careful of the moon? The moon has something to do with transmigration? Yes, the Emperor's tone indicates that he still has some contingency plans, and he might not completely perish. He might be watching me. There should also be clues to such matters, and they should also be written in the earlier diary entries. As conclusions and puzzlements flashed through Klein's mind, he finally turned solemn. He made the diary in his hand vanish and looked towards Katlia. Do you have anything you want to ask? Katlia nudged the heavy glasses on her nose and politely bowed her head. Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to know if Emperor Roselle is still alive. This question snapped the other members of the Tarot Club out of their own thoughts as they looked towards the end of the bronze table in agitation. Although Emperor Roselle being alive wasn't directly related to them, nor would it bring any obvious influence, this topic was enough to stir the thirst hidden deep in the hearts of people regarding rumors and gossip. I thought I would be immune to such matters after advancing to a psychiatrist. Sigh, I'm really curious. Audrey looked at Mr. Fool with bright eyes as she waited for him to give the answer. Only Derek was uninterested in the matter. The reason why he looked at Mr. Fool was solely because everyone else had done so. Indeed, Queen Mystic's questions are basically targeted at the diary pages she provides. Klein didn't feel stumped as he skillfully chuckled. Perhaps. By using the answer, perhaps, he was expressing that Emperor Roselle had the hope of saving himself. As for whether he eventually succeeded or whether there was an accident, it wasn't in the scope of the question that might not have an answer. Perhaps. Mr. Fool is implying that Emperor Roselle might still be alive? Katlia and company felt as though they had heard the greatest secret in the world as they felt a little agitated and excited. However, they could also sense the underlying tone in Mr. Fool's words. Due to the lack of diary entries and with him having just awoken recently, he was unable to determine if Emperor Roselle had seized an opportunity. To determine that would require more clues and evidence in the future. Regardless, Emperor Roselle was likely mentally prepared for the assassination. Without giving Justice, the Hanged Man, and company to think of the related problems, Klein leaned back and said with a calm tone, "That's all from me." Furs hurriedly snapped out of her fantasizing of Roselle's late years as she looked to the end of the bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to communicate privately with the world. It will end quickly. What does she want to communicate with Gehrman Sparrow about? Isn't Mr. X's matter over? Klein thought in puzzlement as he nodded gently. Yes. Following that, he blocked the senses of the other members and controlled the world to chuckle hoarsely. Is there anything else? Furs deliberated for 2 seconds and said, "This is the matter. Mr. X's head allowed me to receive a handsome reward. I believe that I didn't pay enough on this matter to match the difficulty of the mission. Therefore, I wish to compensate you. How much do you wish to receive?" Not bad. You actually want to compensate me without any prompting. Although Miss Magician is a little greedy on gaining petty advantages, she's still an honest person. It's very normal to earn some profit while making a transaction. It's not considered greedy. The pleasantly surprised Klein sighed inwardly in praise as he made the world chuckle. How much can you pay? Furs hesitated for a moment and said, £5,000. She had used the £10,000 price she had informed her teacher, and planned to split it evenly with Mr. World. Furthermore, she needed the recipe, crystal ball, and beyonder ingredient, thus, she planned on selling the 2 properties and give him money directly. And as for the reason why Furs was this generous, it had to do with the mission being harder than she had expected while also paying too low a price. In addition, she was increasingly fearful of the world Gehrman Sparrow. She didn't dare to offend the crazy adventurer and terrifying bounty hunter. The Abraham family gave quite a huge reward. Klein controlled the world to say with a laugh, if you can use large amounts of gold coins in place of notes, you can pay less. It will just depend on how much you can gather. I'll try my best. Although Furs was very puzzled over why Mr. World valued gold coins that much, she didn't dare to ask. He had done the same with Ma'am Hermit's transaction previously. She paused before asking, Mr. World, when would you need to use Lamino's travels? I plan on renting it out before and after that period in order to earn some money and be under powers. Rent it out? Rent out a mystical item? Klein was taken aback upon hearing that. He never expected Miss Magician to have such business-oriented mind. Chapter 791, New Model. As a youth that came from the Internet age on Earth, Klein quickly understood Miss Magician's idea, how she prepared to do it, and what she was relying on. Isn't this sharing economy? With the Tarot Club and the Fool, there's no technological limitation. Miss Magician is usually lazy and doesn't have a strong presence, but I never expected her to have sharp acumen on such matters. It also stems from me requesting to borrow the spellbook. Regardless, to be able to quickly be inspired and set up a business model is pretty good. Klein deliberately made the World Gehrman Sparrow hesitate for a few seconds before saying, I might need it this weekend and next week. He was estimating this based on the time it took Mr. Hanged Man to return from the Abyss Maelstrom to the Worsted Sea, while also allocating time for him to stabilize his spirituality and replenish his supplies. When the time came, they would join forces to explore the primitive island with many Beyonder creatures. Furs hurriedly nodded. All right, I will make the arrangements to prevent others from using it. As she heaved a sigh of relief, she requested Mr. Fool that he bear witness for the subsequent rental agreements. After obtaining a confirmation from him, she indicated that she was done with the private communication. Following that, she conjured Lamino's travels and surveyed the table. Everyone, I have here a mystical item. It has a total of 38 pages. Each page can help the user record Beyonder powers they encounter. They will then be able to release it when needed, but it will be slightly weaker than the original power. Each page can be repeatedly recorded. Each record can only be used once. Amongst them, 3 pages can be used to record demigod-level Beyonder powers, but the chances of success are very low. It might not succeed 1 in 10 times. Furs simply explained the traits of Lamino's travels and its negative effects. It lit up the eyes of Audrey and company. With them no longer being novices in the domain of mysticism or the Beyonder world, it wasn't difficult for them to tell the value of Miss Magician's notebook without her making it explicit to them. At the same time, they viewed it as a demigod-level artifact. It resembles a shepherd and the creeping hunger. They allow the use of the Beyonder powers from other pathways, but there aren't as many negative effects. There's also a chance to record a demigod power. Draw my own blood. Audrey suddenly shrank her hand back in fear as she thought over the matter. As a powerful noble's daughter, she had almost never been injured from a young age. Therefore, she had an extreme fear of pain that remained an unknown to her. Taking the opportunity when Furs paused, she raised her hand slightly and asked, Miss Magician, how much do you wish to sell it for? Audrey believed that her father, Earl Hall, would also be able to recognize the value of Lamino's travels, so it was certain that she could be reimbursed by him. Therefore, she planned on fully satisfying Furs's requirements. She must be lacking money recently, or else she wouldn't be selling such an important and useful mystical item. While Audrey thought in pity, she considered whether she should offer to buy it at a premium. Damn it! Why can't it be put on sale after I return from the primitive island? Alger had a strong interest in Lamino's travels, but he wasn't able to produce the money or materials needed to purchase this mystical item. £1,300 was money that an ordinary person might not be able to save up even in 10 to 20 years, but compared to an item at the level of Laymanos Travels, it was nothing. It's worth at least £10,000. If I encounter Beyonders that are backed by powerful factions, it wouldn't be a problem selling it for more than £30,000. Alger swept his glance at Justice, who was inquiring about the price, as well as Katlia, who had nudged her glasses, looking as though she was planning to join the bid. He couldn't help but sigh. He didn't believe that the transaction would fail according to his wishes, having it left unsold before he returned from the primitive island. Miss Justice has money, and the Hermit has Queen Mystic and the Moses Ascetic Order. They don't lack money or resources. Sigh. Alger adjusted his seating posture as he looked across the table with a heavy look. Emlyn and Derek were similarly interested in Laymanos Travels, but it was simply interest. They knew that they lacked the ability to provide anything in a fair exchange. When she heard Miss Justice's question, Furs realized that she had forgotten to mention the most crucial point. She hurriedly added, "No, it's not for purchase. I'm only renting it. When you need it, you can rent it for a short period which will be witnessed by Mr. Fool." "Rent? You can do that?" At that moment, everyone except Klein and Derek were surprised. Without a doubt, they knew what a rental transaction was, but they never expected it to be applied to a mystical item, much less have it appear in the Tarot Club. This was apparently very doable. It was relatively useful for every member of the Tarot Club, and it wouldn't cost them much while remaining affordable. Furthermore, Miss Magician could slowly build up quite a sizable fortune by doing so, but in fact, the best result was to record Beyonder powers. She could gather different kinds of Beyonder powers from various pathways in this way, making it far more efficient than seeking the chance to record it on her own. Alger quickly realized the key to the rental transaction as he was delighted. He asked, "How much is the rental fee?" Laymanos Travels corresponds to a sequence 6. It's usually about £5,000, but due to its uniqueness, it costs at least £10,000. Furs had built up quite a bit of experience during her time in the Tarot Club, so after some consideration, she said, each rental basically starts at £300. Every additional day is an additional £50. And when returning it, the notebook needs to have 2 additional pages of Beyonder powers than when it was rented out. If there's only 1 blank page or no blank pages when it's rented, one just needs to fill up the full book. Having 2 additional pages didn't mean 2 additional powers. That also meant that they could use any of the Beyonder powers in Laymanos Travels. One just needed to make up for it later. There was no need for it to be of the same type, as pages were all that mattered. £50 a day, £1,500 a month, if it's possible, I can keep renting it. Audrey did a simple count of the costs. Alger was thrilled when he heard that, as he said with an unperturbed look, "I plan on renting it for 2 days, but the exact price needs negotiation. It will be adjusted based on what Beyonder powers are recorded in the notebook." He felt more confident towards his exploration of the primitive island. "When do you plan to rent it?" Furs asked, delighted that she had business right away. "I'll be renting it for 2 days sometime between this weekend to next weekend." "The exact time hasn't been determined," Alger replied without any hesitation. Furs immediately frowned as she said apprehensively, "This period of time has already been reserved for Mr. World." "Reserved for the world? When did this happen?" Alger was surprised as he looked at the other end of the long bronze tail. He soon came to a realization that it had been agreed upon during their private communication. Why would they come to such an agreement? Miss Magician doesn't need to have informed him ahead of time. They had other transactions during the private communication? What kind of communications and transactions would they have? Miss Magician had commissioned the assassination of an Aurora Order Oracle. The world had accepted the mission, and one of the traits of the Oracle is the ability to record and use the Beyonder powers of others once. This is identical to Laymanos Travels. Does this mean that the world has already succeeded? As such, Miss Magician is indebted to him, and she hadn't fully resolved it. Now, she came up with this method to pay off the rest. Alger eliminated the possibilities and finally felt that he had found the truth. Without anyone catching wind of it, the World Gehrman Sparrow had already hunted an Aurora Order oracle, an oracle suspected to be a Sequence 5. This secretly made Alger feel alarmed because he was about to cooperate with the world soon. Thankfully, there's Mr. Fool bearing witness. As a blessed, Gehrman Sparrow wouldn't violate the agreement he makes in front of a god. Alger consoled himself and retracted his gaze from the world. Meanwhile, Audrey and Katlia had recalled the matter of the Aurora Order oracle from the transactions involving both Miss Magician and Mr. World, as well as how the oracle's powers were similar to Lamino's travels, hence, they believed that the world might have already completed the mission. Renting the spellbook was one of the parts to completing the transaction. Emlyn didn't think about such matters, putting his focus on the unavailability of Lamino's travels this weekend and the following week. In other words, I can borrow it for the next few days? If I have help from this notebook, those two primitive believers wouldn't be able to pose a threat. Emlyn looked around and turned anxious as he leisurely said, "Can I rent it for today and tomorrow?" £400 plus 2 pages of Beyonder Powers, Furs directly announced the price. Emlyn nodded gently. Introduce what Beyonder Powers are recorded first. If they aren't very useful to me, I wish that the price can be lowered because I'll need to waste time recording powers. Furs flipped through Lamino's travels and began to give a vague introduction. Door opening. Black screen. Tumble. Teleport. Lightning strike. Float. Flight. Wind blades. Why are there so many Beyonder Powers in the storm domain? The world has used it before. He recorded the Beyonder Powers corresponding to See God from Mr. Fool. When I return to the cathedral, I should find out what recently happened in Backlund. That oracle couldn't have died without a trace. As Alger listened, he began thinking of investigating the matter. Chapter 792, The Fool's Authority. The hermit similarly thought of the World Gehrman Sparrow from hearing the Beyonder Powers which were recorded in Lamino's travels. I wonder if I can pay a certain price to get the Fool to showcase demigod powers of the storm pathway as well as his domain. This will be better than seeking the help of the Moses ascetic order. That will make them know of my possession of Lamino's travels. I should first write to Her Majesty. Perhaps, she will come to the future to showcase her powers. Katlia was increasingly convinced that the spellbook had a value that exceeded its level and was very regretful that Miss Magician was only renting it. After hearing the description, Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief. This was because the Beyonder Powers like lightning were very lethal against artificial vampires. Of course, it was the same for Sanguine. Very good. I was still worried about needing to seek the sun's help and passing Lamino's travels to him to get him to showcase purification powers to be recorded. Emlyn instantly became relaxed as he glanced at Derek beside him while saying to Furs, "Deal." £400 with the recording of a few Beyonder Powers was nothing compared to the completion of his mission. I can earn money quickly and also obtain Beyonder Powers this way. Furs suddenly felt that her future was bright as she hurriedly smiled. All right, I'll get Mr. Fool to transfer it to you after the gathering. Right on the heels of that, she turned to say to Katlia, "Ma'am, the Abraham family's direct descendant has given a reply. Do you wish to communicate privately or have me directly say it out loud?" Katlia thought and said, "Let's do it privately." Soon, the others had their senses blocked as Furs recounted what her teacher said. They don't know much about Mr. Door either. They only know 2 things, no, 3. First, among their ancestors, there is an existence known as Mr. Door. Second, this ancestor vanished in the War of the 4 Emperors. They've been struggling to find him. Third, they will hear ravings that can cause a loss of control during the full moon and blood moon. In addition, they temporarily do not wish to make any direct contact. The third point was added by Furs by herself. She wished that Ma'am Hermit and the Queen Mystic behind her could use this to further understand Mr. Door's matters. This was beneficial in helping the Abraham escape the fate of being cursed. Mr. Door is the Abraham family's ancestor and he vanished in the War of the Four Emperors. He would create ravings during full moons? The latter was confirmed by Mr. Fool, so there's nothing suspicious. That is to say that although Mr. Door has vanished, he still can affect Beyonders of the same bloodline, as well as living beings that used certain items during the full moon and blood moon. This means that he hasn't completely lost his connection with the real world. This is how the Emperor was able to interact with him. Her Majesty once said that there were members of the Abraham family who worked for the Emperor back then. Cadlia had some theories as she gently nodded. If there are any questions, I'll get you to pass them on. I'll pay the remaining £650 today. With £650, along with Mr. Moon's £400, I've made a profit of £1,050 today. Together with the £730 from before, as well as the sale of the 2 properties to pay Mr. World, I might still have £1,000 left. My savings are about to exceed £3,000. This way, I'll have the money needed to purchase the other main ingredient for Scribe. I might still have some left over. At that moment, Furs suddenly found herself a little wealthy. This made her consider helping purchase the Interrogator Beyonder characteristic for Zio to make up for the risk she had to endure over Mr. X's assassination. After the blocking of senses was lifted, Furs heard the World Gehrman Sparrow speak before she could say a word. I need a mystical item from the Marauder pathway. It can be at sequence 9 or 8. Cadlia considered for a moment and said, I can ask around for you. However, items of the Marauder pathway aren't common. There might be a premium involved. No problem. Klein controlled the world to provide the response. He then made his marionette look at the now wealthy Miss Magician. I want to sell an Interrogator Beyonder characteristic for only £1,000. Typically, this sequence 7 Beyonder characteristic which could be used as a main ingredient should have been priced around £1,200, but Klein had 2 sets at the moment. Furthermore, considering how he had used Miss Zio's identity to participate in Mr. X's gathering, there was a certain degree of danger he was bringing to her, therefore, he gave a slight discount. It's only £1,000. That's like a sale at a department store. But why does Mr. World know that I want it? He is Mr. Fool's blessed. The Interrogator Beyonder characteristic was in his hands, and he is also aware that I can now afford it. Furs was stunned for 2 seconds as she nearly forgot to reply. During this process, Audrey held back the urge to engage in shopping, because she knew that Zio needed the item. £1,000? An Interrogator's Beyonder characteristic? Cadlia seriously thought over the hidden intent behind the world when she heard Miss Magician say, Deal, I haven't even made my offer. Cadlia mumbled inwardly as she maintained her silence. She could tell that the world and the Magician had reached a strange level of understanding on this matter, so she didn't interject. Similarly, she also sensed that something good had happened to the Hanged Man this week. He appeared more spirited than before, appearing more confident. He previously purchased the potion formula and main ingredients to Ocean Songster. He had also asked me where obninsks that do not belong to the Church of Storms can be found. This is likely related to the ritual. He has already advanced. Cadlia suddenly felt a sense of danger. As the Admiral of Stars who was famous throughout the 5 seas, she always felt a sense of superiority in the Tarot Club. But in recent times, with the World Gehrman Sparrow showing his ability at hunting pirate admirals, followed by the Hanged Man reaching sequence 5, a sequence 5 that made him adept at sea battles, she felt that she no longer had the right to belittle others. She felt a sense of urgency that hadn't existed in her for a long time. However, I have sequence 4 ahead of me. It's the boundary between spirituality and godhood. It's not that easy to advance. I still don't see any hope despite preparing for years. Catlia sighed inwardly as she looked at the world-Gehrman sparrow and asked, any chances for the blood of a mythical creature? I've been waiting for you to ask this. The fool Klein smiled while watching the transactions as he controlled the world to hoarsely laugh. That angel got me to ask you what you can give him in exchange for a drop of blood. He emphasizes that it needs to satisfy him. Angel? Mr. World directly contacted an angel? Furthermore, he has convinced the angel to provide a drop of blood. Audrey was first alarmed before her thoughts raced as she turned to look at the seat of honor. She suspected that the world, Mr. Fool's blessed, had contacted an angel that was in service to Mr. Fool. She was like the magician, believing that the world only knew of clues to the location of an angel or its remains. They never expected him to directly converse with an angel. One had to know that the grounded angels were equivalent to the leaders of the 7 churches. Indeed. Alger sighed silently, believing that his guess has been verified. As expected of Mr. Fool's blessed. Catlia held back her surprise and shock as she pondered. May I know what pathway this angel is from? The world surveyed the area and said, monster. Monster, which means it's an angel from the fate pathway. It's no wonder Mr. Fool's honorific name has the words King of Yellow and Black who wields good luck. Audrey, Derek, and company were enlightened, believing that their inferences matched the actual situation and the inherent logic. Their gazes and guesses stirred Klein. He realized a corresponding problem. In the honorific name he fabricated, the description of wielding good luck had successfully been directed towards the mysterious space above the gray fog. Is this related to why the people from the fate pathway can see my uniqueness? Could this be related to why the Snake of Mercury, Will Septon, took the initiative to establish friendly ties with me? In my honorific name's 3 lines, the first line is a description of my inherent self, and the second is about the corresponding divine domain. Only the third line involves the authority. Wields good luck. Of course, the Fool itself can also contain a certain amount of authority. Klein suddenly felt that he needed to find an opportunity to communicate with the unborn fetus. However, he suspected that the paper crane would tear at any moment. This was because just erasing the original content was already a rather precarious process. At this moment, Catlia said, thanks for your help. I will seriously consider it and give you a response as soon as possible. She planned on consulting Queen Mystic to see if there were any conditions that would entice an angel from the fate pathway. With the conversation between the world and the hermit ending, the transactions came to a formal end. The tarot gathering then proceeded into a period for free communication. Furs thought for a moment and looked at Emlyn. I'd like to remind you of 2 things. First, be familiar with the powers on each corresponding page. It will be very dangerous if you were to flip to the wrong page and use the wrong power in combat. Emlyn scoffed immediately as he said, I'm very confident in my intelligence. Furs didn't speak further and switched to mentioning, a serious case involving Beyonders happened in East Borough. The surrounding region is on high alert. If you plan on carrying out any operations, take note of that. Emlyn viewed this piece of information with great importance as he asked, are you aware of what happened? Chapter 793, Surprise Visitor. Upon hearing Mr. Moon's question, Furs nearly blurted out, of course. Better than anyone else. I'm just not too aware of the details. However, she controlled her mouth in time as she apprehensively looked at Mr. World. At the same time, Alger, Audrey, and Catlia vaguely guessed that the serious matter that had happened in Backlund's East Borough was the assassination of the Aurora Order's oracle. Based on the inferences they had before, it was done by the world. And as Emlyn wasn't a spectator, he wasn't able to tell from her eyes. All Furs could do was force a smile at Emlyn. I'm unable to tell you the specifics. I only know that demigod-level Beyonder powers of the Storm Domain appeared back then. The Church of Storms places a great deal of attention over the matter. She didn't dare divulge the reasons on behalf of Mr. World, simply describing what she had seen. She believed that if Mr. World was willing to reveal more, he definitely would have added on to her answer. Demigod level Beyonder powers of the Storm Domain? Audrey and company were taken aback as they instinctively doubted the accuracy of their theories. They had previously imagined that Lamino's travels had been created after the death of the Aurora Order Oracle, therefore, the world had no way of borrowing Mr. Fool's demigod-level powers to record them before the assassination. The serious case involving Beyonders in Eastborough has nothing to do with Mr. World? No, Furza's glance is enough proof that it was caused by Mr. World. But why would a demigod-level Beyonder power of the Storm Domain appear? One possibility is that Lamino's travels isn't a result of this assassination but that it originally belonged to Furz. Another possibility is that a cardinal of the Church of Storms or a Beyonder with the corresponding sealed artifact had delivered an attack. If it were the former, needing Mr. World to use the Beyonder powers at the demigod level implies that the Oracle was relatively powerful with the possible existence of a saint backing him. If it were the latter, to have Mr. World still be able to leave safely after such an assault implies his formidableness. Of course, the possibility can't be eliminated that he deliberately lured the Church of Storms to encounter the Aurora Order's Oracle, and while a battle broke out between demigods, he efficiently carried out an assassination during the chaos. Audrey made some guesses based on the details she had observed, and each guess implied one thing: the world had the strength, intelligence, support, and ability, making him one of the top sequence 5 Beyonders below that of demigods. How terrifying! As expected of Mr. Fool's blessed. When I arrive at a cathedral, I should be able to figure out what happened. Alger also made a basic judgment of the situation as he sighed. All he could do was console himself. With such a helper, the exploration of the primitive island would only be easier. As for Catlia, she shared similar thoughts with Audrey. She planned on asking Queen Mystic about the situation. This owner of the Dawn had previously revealed in her letter that she would be in Backland for the time being. Demigod-level Beyonder powers of the Storm Domain. Emlyn repeated Miss Magician's words as his head ached. Although he enjoyed staying at home and not heading out, he still needed to head out to get some blood to drink from the hospitals. Being in a big city, he was equipped with common knowledge. Together with his elders' warnings and guidance, he knew a lot about the official organizations like the Machinery Hive Mind, Mandated Punishers, and Nighthawks. He knew the influence that a serious case would bring to the area. If I don't have a good disguise while infiltrating Eastborough, I might be caught by the Mandated Punishers before I even approach my targets. Although I have the identity of being part of the Church of Mother Earth and wouldn't be impounded underground or made into a test subject of sealed artifacts, this also means that my operation has failed. I might even have Lamino's travels taken away. During such times, taking the sewers would be even more dangerous. Who knows how many official Beyonders are lying in ambush over there? Emlyn suddenly felt that what seemed like a simple mission had turned difficult. He quickly came to a decision that he would take action in the latter half of the night. During this time, the low-class residents of Eastborough would begin returning home from work. Although it was dark, the streets would be bustling. Even if the Mandated Punishers had 10 times more manpower, it was impossible to carry out any strict surveillance and single out every possible suspect. The next important step is to plan the operation to finish off the 2 artificial vampires without causing much of a stir. I'll have to consider a situation of an intense battle that's impossible to hide. Wait, Miss Magician had just mentioned that Lamino's travels has a Beyonder power known as teleport. The problem is resolved. Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief and chuckled. I will keep that in mind. He had said that sentence very calmly and with great confidence, as though everything was in control. This fellow Emlyn was first stumped before feeling relieved. There's a 90% chance he recalled the Traveler's Door in Lamino's travels. If I hadn't obtained traveling, I definitely would have added the condition that no one is to touch that spellbook's page before the World Gehrman Sparrow. Klein scoffed silently without a word. To him, as there was only one traveler's door in Lamino's travels, he definitely needed to use creeping hunger for his return trip to the primitive island. In that case, he might as well exploit the glove as he needed to feed a death row convict to it. He didn't want to waste it. Anyways, I've warned you. Furs didn't speak further, wishing that everything would go smoothly for Mr. Moon. At that moment, Alger turned to look at Little Sunday. Are you still in the City of Silver? Yes, my recent mission is to acquaint myself with my powers and patrol the surrounding area, Derek replied honestly. Alger thought for a moment before saying, has that shepherd elder not looked for you recently? No. Derek paused. The 6-member council seems to be busy with the former chief's mausoleum. As for what it is, I'm not privy to the information. Klein had heard Little Sun mention of the former chief of the City of Silver. It was said that he had built a mausoleum that reached deep underground before moving into it, and he hadn't appeared again. It was suspected that his attempt to switch to sequence 3 of the death pathway had failed. I wonder what happened inside the mausoleum. My spiritual intuition tells me that there's danger involved. Before Klein spoke, he heard Alger say, take note of this matter. To investigate the former chief's mausoleum at such a critical moment means that it's something important. It might bring you danger. Okay. Derek nodded strongly. I'll do my best to figure out the specifics. The exchange continued. As the members didn't encounter much this week, this segment quickly came to an end. The Tarot Club members began teaching the Sun mysticism languages of the outside world as they learned about ancient myths from him. During this process, Audrey was a little disappointed and depressed. She had failed to buy anything or share anything this week, and her participation appeared lacking. Sigh. My life has been too quiet and stable. I have nothing to share. However, this is normal. As the daughter of one of the top 3 bankers in the kingdom, a daughter of Eastchester's Earl, if I were to frequently encounter beyonder matters, experiencing alarming and exciting matters every week, that means that the present society and government structure is unable to maintain the order of the beyonder world. It would definitely result in a fundamental change to everything. When I return to Backlund, my contact with the psychology alchemists will increase. I'll be able to change this situation. Audrey rapidly became optimistic, and she stood up and bade Mr. Fool farewell. Over the past half a year, she had read quite a number of useful books thanks to Susie. In terms of profundity and maturity, she was a lot better than before. Backlund Street, Northborough, 160 Backlund Street. After ending the Tarot Club, Klein walked to the attached balcony to his bedroom, and he looked at the surrounding environment which was filled with vegetation. With Miss Magician's attempt to rent out Lamino's travels, there will be more of such Tarot Club transactions in the future. They might not have realized that their own beyonder powers can be sold. Once the rentals happen more frequently, someone will ultimately request someone to help record a particular power. When the time comes, I'll be able to supply beyonder powers of various domains thanks to the numerous mystical items I have. It won't be too expensive, but it's long-lasting, and it will often be in demand. I wonder who will be the first to muster their courage to seek the Fool for help, hoping that a demigod power can be recorded. This needs to be a fair exchange, and a sufficient price needs to be paid. If no one dares take that step, afraid that it's blasphemous, I can let the world be an example. After all, Mr. Fool has shown his friendliness and casualness from the beginning. As long as no mistakes are made, similar transactions can be made. Having the precedent of punishing Ma'am Hermit, I don't believe anyone will belittle the Fool as a result. They would be honored, delighted, and fearful. Klein thought about the Tarot Club as his thoughts wandered, filled with anticipation towards the trade of beyonder powers in the future. At this moment, he heard knocking at the door. "Please enter," Dwayne Dantes with his gray sideburns turned around and said. The doorknob turned and the door opened. Butler Walter in his white gloves walked in and said respectfully, "Sir, Ma'am Mary from the National Atmospheric Pollution Council is here to visit you. Do you wish to meet her?" Mary Schott. The major shareholder of the coin company, the lady who got me to investigate her former husband's adultery? Why is she here? Don't tell me that Dwayne Dantes has caught her fancy. Klein was slightly puzzled as he nodded with a smile. It's almost tea time. Let's have it a little earlier. All right, I will invite Ma'am Mary to the activity room on the second story. Walter easily understood his employer's intentions. Klein nodded slightly without saying anything else. With the help of his valet, Richardson, he wore his coat and went down to the second story. Soon, he saw Ma'am Mary with her tall cheekbones in the activity room. This lady was dressed in a dark blue dress with elegant accessories in an ostentatious but restrained manner. Compared to last year, she appeared more classy and with a higher temperament. Good afternoon, ma'am. I've always been considering finding a time to visit you. I would wish to hear about your investigations on Backlund's atmospheric pollution. Klein took the initiative to speak politely. Mary replied with a smile, "Unfortunately, I didn't manage to wait for it." After exchanging a few words of pleasantries as they talked about the recent weather, Klein sat on a single-seater as he raised his porcelain teacup. "Ma'am, you seem to have something troubling you?" He could tell that Mary was hesitant and deliberating. Mary laughed as she sighed. "I've heard about your experience and wisdom. I believe that you're a gentleman with excellent foresight. This is the thing, are you interested in purchasing some of the coin company's shares?" "Why? Ma'am, are you in trouble?" Klein asked in a staid manner. Mary shook her head. "Someone else is selling them." Chapter 794, Short-Term Investment. Someone else is selling? Klein ruminated over those words without immediately asking. After the servant placed the silver 3-layered tray down for high tea and left, he said with a smile, "Ma'am, why don't you purchase it yourself? Even a blind person knows that loan will place more attention on environmental pollution in the future. Therefore, the coin company, that deal with anthracite and high-quality charcoal, definitely has a promising future. It being worth $500,000 or even £1 million wouldn't be a fantasy. Of course, the premise is that the company's management can keep up with the corresponding expansion. In such a situation, the acquisition of shares in the coin company is definitely a profitable business. If I were you, I'd take it for myself, no matter how much debt I get myself into." Mary used 2 fingers to pick a cucumber sandwich from the bottom silver tray, took a tiny nibble, and slowly chewed before swallowing it down. With this as a buffer, she finally organized her words. Ever since the law to fix atmospheric pollution was passed, the coin company has been rapidly developing. The faces of the shareholders have begun changing. As you know, people who have their sights on money will often have good business sense. And behind them, there are usually some powerful figures at play. If I weren't a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, and had used this to get to know quite a number of nobles and high-ranking government officials, I believe I wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure, and I would end up selling my shares at a relatively good price. I would then leave the stage with a considerably good profit. But even so, most of the shares will quickly concentrate, and I'll quickly lose my status as the highest shareholder, losing control over the company's direction. This is something I inherited from my father. I don't want it to become somebody else's toy. I wish for it to slowly develop into the biggest anthracite and high-quality supplier to Backlund, or even all of the Lone Kingdom. Heh, it's not that I haven't tried other solutions. I've pledged my shares and sold my property, investing a large sum of my liquidity into it, absorbing 15% of the shares in secret, as well as requesting friends that I can trust to help. I've obtained a total of 10% of the shares, and together with the 20% I originally had, I hold 45% in total. The current situation is that a minor shareholder suddenly decided to liquidate his 3%, and my friends and I temporarily do not have the money to acquire it. This is a commercial war. This was a first for Klein, who was accustomed to dealing with beyonders. He found it fresh but also unfamiliar. He similarly reached out his hand and selected a sandwich which had high-quality turkey at the bottom of the 3-layered tray. As he ate, he contemplated for about 10 seconds and said, "The shares that you acquire later can also be pledged, right? There won't be enough time. The other party has already provided an offer, and the transaction can be closed at any time," Mary said as she finished the food in her hand. Klein leaned back into his sofa in a relaxed manner. "Why did you come to me?" Upon hearing the question, Mary heaved a slight sigh of relief. "First, you must have brought quite a sizable amount of money to Backlund. You wouldn't need to raise funds through different means. Second, you just came to Backlund, so you aren't deeply involved with the other party or in other aspects. This also means that I'm not afraid that you would violate the terms of the agreement. Even if you choose to align with them, you'll have to consider if it's worth violating the law. Third, although we've only met once, I believe you are a very dignified and knowledgeable gentleman. Your praise is leaving me a little embarrassed. However, it also means that my acting performance as Dwayne Dantes is effective. At the very least, everyone knows that he's a middle-aged gentleman with foresight and competence, with plenty of money that he has nowhere to invest. Considering the original £16,493 and Miss Magician's £6,000, as well as the £48 provided by Mr. X, I have a total of £22,991 and 5 gold coins. Even if I deduct the £5,987 I owe Miss Messenger, I'll be considered a true tycoon. Many people with assets worth £100,000 might not have that much liquidity." Klein couldn't help but do account of his wealth as he asked with a smile, "Ma'am, what do you wish for me to do?" Mary sipped some tea and said eloquently, "Acquire the 3% shares. But before that, I'll sign 2 contracts with you. The first contract stipulates that I'll forcefully purchase the shares from you in 3 months and buy it at the highest price over this period of time. The corresponding tax will be shouldered by me. The second contract stipulates that we act in concert. In addition, I will make you a member of the board of directors for the coin company. You will enjoy the corresponding perks as you monitor the company's development. This will help you be integrated even better into high society." Sounds like a sure win. It's equivalent to me providing a loan, and Ma'am Mary will repay me with a certain amount of interest and social resources. And compared to a debt agreement, I'll be holding on to the shares of an excellent company. It's more secure. After all, we are considered strangers. Of course, that's under the premise that the coin company itself is all right. This is also why she's making me a director. Klein analyzed the conditions proposed by Ma'am Mary and slowly felt enticed by them. From his point of view, Dwayne Dantes needed some investments. Otherwise, he would appear suspicious. Then, selecting the kind of investment was a rather important problem since it had to be considered that Dwayne Dantes might have to give up everything and leave Backlund because of his operation's failure or success. When the time comes, there's a chance to take away the money, but I can forget about the shares. This kind of investment, one that allows me to quickly recoup my investment, meets my requirements. I might even earn quite a bit. Klein contemplated for a moment before warmly smiling. Helping a lady resolve problems is something that I need to do. Ma'am Mary immediately felt relieved. Just as she was about to say something, she heard Dwayne Dantes's attractive voice continue, "However, I'm rather cautious in regards to any investments I make. I will hire a lawyer and an accounting team to investigate the coin company's situation. I'll try to reach a conclusion as quickly as possible, and if there aren't any problems, we can begin our cooperation. Aside from that, I will also do a divination." Klein silently added inwardly, "Definitely." Ma'am Mary smiled and added, I'll bear the costs for such expenses. Klein didn't reject the offer as he nodded and said, how much would the 3% shares cost? The current valuation is £9,600, but the shareholder believes that the coin company has a promising future, so it can't be lower than £12,000. Mary gave him the exact details. Phew. Klein used a calm and relaxed manner to smile. That's still all right. Dwayne Dantes is indeed rich. Mary thought as she said, Dwayne, can I invite you to visit the coin company tomorrow? That's exactly what I wish for, Klein replied with a smile. At the same time, he couldn't help but think of something. His former landlord, Stellan Sammer's husband, was likely still a manager at coin company. Yet another familiar face, but it's not one for Dwayne Dantes. Klein felt wistful for some baffling reason. At 8 p.m., there were still crowds of people entering East Borough from the other streets. Fatigue obviously colored their faces. And this continued almost until 10. Emlyn White had changed into a grayish-blue worker's attire, wore a cap, and hid himself in the alley of the Backlund Bridge area while observing the poor that sauntered back and forth. Although he didn't have any experience in disguising himself, he had eyes and brains. Just a short observation was enough for him to discover the problems with his attire. The most important point was that, compared to the poor who had dirty and ragged clothes, the work attire he had bought in the afternoon was too new and clean, easily attracting the attention of others. Emlyn thought for a moment, returned to the dark alley, and reached out his fingers. Using what he had seen, he began tearing open the areas that were easily damaged. Then, he observed his surroundings as his facial muscles gradually distorted into a grimace. With a look of contempt, Emlyn came to the wall, closed his eyes, and began dabbing the dirt onto his clothes and pants. The smell of coal, the smell of rotting mud. Emlyn subconsciously extended his palm away from himself as he covered his mouth with his other hand. He nearly vomited. At this moment, he realized that having an extraordinary sense of smell wasn't necessarily a good thing. After a few minutes of excruciating torture, Emlyn finally finished his disguise. Even his handsome face was stained with coal. With this disguise, he hunched his back, and slipped into the crowd, quickly entering East Borough without garnering any attention. As he walked, Emlyn realized a problem. He wasn't familiar with the roads at all. He had no idea where Limestone Street or Beluga Whale Street was in East Borough, while most of the street signs had already been damaged. An assassination attempt really is a troublesome matter. Emlyn mumbled as he began asking around for directions. After nearly an hour of hard work, he finally arrived at Limestone Street. The streets were narrow, with the buildings on both sides leaning close to each other. Even in the day, it appeared dark. At night, it gave off a terrifying sense of creepiness and darkness. But to the sanguine, such an environment wasn't bad. The only problem was the dirt and messiness. After spraying a medicine that eliminated his scent, Emlyn walked into the condominium at Unit 6, went to the third story, and approached the public washroom with his nose pinched before standing outside the room of primordial moon believer, Argos. Emlyn cocked his ears to listen for a while before he stopped pinching his nose in puzzlement. He nearly fainted from the stench wafting over from the washroom. It took him a great bit of effort to focus his gaze on the room. His sense of smell told him that there wasn't anyone inside, nor were there any corpses. He moved away. Or he isn't back. Emlyn muttered silently in a daze. He never expected his hunt to be so unsuccessful. After reining in his emotions, Emlyn left the condominium and rushed to 19 Beluga Whale Street. This time, he was delighted to discover that someone was home. Gallus Kevin was home. At that moment, Emlyn caught the scent of another person. It was very identical to Argos's apartment at Limestone Street. 2 people. There are 2 people in the room. Argos isn't home because he came to Gallus Kevin. 2. Emlyn's expression suddenly froze. He wasn't worried if it was one-on-one. But if it was 1 against 2, he was still a little fearful with Lemano's travels. After all, the two of them were artificial vampires with rather significant strength. Chapter 795, Patience. As a sanguine who liked to stay home, the number of battles Emlyn had involved himself in could be counted on one hand. Furthermore, he had never attempted fighting in the state of a numbers disadvantage. Be it his attack on the previous primordial moon believer, or resisting Bishop Yutravsky from the Harvest Church, he basically had the numerical advantage in being the worst at one-on-one fights. Thinking back to the failure of his family of 3 attempting to defeat the half-giant bishop, Emlyn's expression turned livid as though he had recalled the torture he suffered back at the Harvest Church. As there weren't many residents living here, and with Gallus Kevin having sharp senses as an artificial vampire, he didn't dare stay outside the door for too long. He quickly walked past the area and walked to the end of the corridor and hid in the shadows. What should I do next? Emlyn leaned against random objects that blocked the crimson sunlight as his thoughts rapidly whirled in an attempt to find a solution with his pitiful amounts of experience. Gradually, the words which the hanged man had taught the sun surfaced in his mind. Patience is an important premise when dealing with many situations. Only by being able to curb your urges and irascibility will you be able to avoid danger to the greatest extent. At times, tolerance is very important. Tolerance. Emlyn nodded indiscernibly and knew what he needed to do. He planned on laying in ambush until Argos left. As this wasn't the artificial vampire's residence, it was certain that he would leave. When the time came, Emlyn could deal with a one-on-one situation. Patience, tolerance, waiting. Emlyn repeated these words inwardly so as to resist the damage the surroundings were dealing to him. The air wafting through the first floor of the condominium was filled with the stench of piss, rotting moisture, the unflushed smell of feces, the odor of some of its residents, as well as all kinds of nauseating, unpleasant, and disgusting smells. Mixed together, they were like a poison that ate at Emlyn's senses. For the first time in his life, Emlyn wished that he could slice off his nose. He had the feeling as though he was stuck in an abyss or was in hell suffering torture. Patience. Tolerance. Waiting, he mechanically chanted the principles, finding each second that passed excruciatingly long. Finally, he saw Gallus Kevin's door open. A thin dark brown figure walked out. His cheekbones protruded, and he had a high, sharp, and crooked nose. He was none other than the primordial moon believer, Argos. At that moment, his face had patches of swollen festering that looked disgusting. Indeed, as that young boss, Ian, said, these fellows wear clothes that are clean and tidy, completely unlike the residents of East Borough. Emlyn became spirited as he watched Argos leave the condominium. After patiently waiting for nearly 5 minutes, he stood up and decided to take action. As his target, Gallus Kevin, was an artificial vampire, Emlyn was rather aware of his opponent's strengths and traits. Hence, he had made preparations in a targeted manner. Gallus Kevin's sense of smell isn't weaker than mine when I just came of age. This actually cannot be confirmed. For him to stay in such an environment, he might have already lost his nose and brains. Besides, his spirituality can't be weak, and he has an innate instinct that's geared towards danger. His vision and hearing can't be too bad either. As Emlyn viewed his opponent with scorn, he consumed a potion and sprayed out a liquid to cover his body's scent again. Right on the heels of that, by consuming the potion and spraying it on like last time, he hid his body and attire, disappearing as though he had been wiped away by an eraser. In a dark, uninhabited corner, a palm-sized notebook which was bronze-green in color had suddenly appeared out of thin air, as though it had passed through a transparent screen. It began flipping itself almost silently before fixing onto a white page that was filled with astromancy symbols. As these symbols vanished, the surroundings brightened up a little. This was the disruption ability of an astrologer. Then, Lemano's travels was retracted, disappearing inch by inch as it was completely concealed by the invisible screen. Prepared, Emlyn recalled his plans. He lightened his footsteps and silently arrived outside Gallus Kevin's apartment without approaching the door. The notebook appeared out of thin air once again before being flipped to the door-opening page. An illusory sound immediately resounded in Emlyn's mind as it prompted him to reach out a hand towards the wall. At the same time, Emlyn cautiously pulled back Lamino's travels into his clothes, using his invisible coat to hide it. When Emlyn's palm finally pressed the wall, he saw a ghostly blue, incorporeal, blurry door appear before his eyes. It was embedded in the wall, but it also showed signs of masonry at the bottom. Cocking his ear to hear the goings-on inside the house, he took a sniff of the air before taking a step forward. He then passed through the ghostly blue door as if he was passing a screen of water. The scene before him changed immediately. It was filled with walls covered in stains and 3 wooden beds on the side, a worn-out cupboard, and all kinds of miscellaneous items. This was the inside of Gallus Kevin's apartment. As for the ghostly blue door behind Emlyn, it had long vanished as if it had never existed before. Cautiously surveying the area, Emlyn caught sight of his target, Gallus Kevin. This primordial moon believer was a good-looking mixed blood. He had long hair that reached his shoulders, and his eyes were a little red, as though he didn't fully acquire the eyes of a sanguine. At that moment, he was sitting by the side of the bed, staring at the door, his thoughts a mystery. Emlyn circled to his side without causing a commotion. He took out Lamino's travels which he ensured was in a blind spot, and he flipped to a page that left his fingers slightly numb. It was a yellowish-brown goatskin page. The surface was filled with all kinds of ancient and distorted symbols and patterns. Together, they constructed a figure that looked like a thin tree with outstretched branches. After adjusting his angle, Emlyn slid his finger across the page. Suddenly, silver lightning illuminated the room as if it was daytime. A sizzling sound was heard as the lightning smote Gallus Kevin on the head, charring the primordial moon believer instantly. His body convulsed as his eyes lost focus. The silver bolts of lightning continued snaking around while Emlyn's figure surfaced behind the frozen target's back. He reached out his right palm and clenched his opponent's neck. Gotcha! He calmly snapped Gallus Kevin's neck and yanked off his head and tossed the body away, eliminating the possibility of letting his opponent heal himself with his strong restorative powers. Pa! Gallus Kevin's headless corpse collapsed to the ground as blood sprayed everywhere. An artificial vampire lost its life just like that. Emlyn's calm expression was quickly replaced with surprise. He looked at the head in his hand with disbelief. He realized that Gallus Kevin didn't realize what was happening even upon death. Fixed in his eyes were pain and puzzlement. It's that easy? It happened like a breeze? Although Emlyn was proud, he didn't believe that he could finish off an artificial vampire that easily. However, reality told him that it was as easy as a breeze. A lightning strike that can cause paralysis, together with my high movement speed, had allowed me to instantly kill my target. The premise is that he's weak to lightning, allowing him to be easily paralyzed. Also, I had interfered with his spiritual intuition ahead of time and avoided attacking him head-on by passing through the wall. Those were key to my success. After a few seconds of surprise, Emlyn recalled the details and concluded plenty of useful experience. This made him truly realize the potency of matching Beyonder powers, as well as the value of Lamino's travels. It's no wonder Mr. Hanged Man was the first one to have thoughts of renting it. Emlyn reined in his thoughts and looked at the blood that gushed out of Gallus Kevin. His throat couldn't help but move. He hadn't had that much fresh blood in a while. However, he didn't dare drink it. This was because the deceased Beyonder characteristic had yet to appear. The blood would still contain parts of it, and drinking it would easily result in excessive Beyonder characteristics, adding the risk of losing control. This wasn't conducive to his subsequent operations. Emlyn retracted his gaze and surveyed the surroundings. He found a stack of old newspapers and a tiny wooden chest. He planned on using that to store Gallus Kevin's head in. And before that, he sat down and waited for the Beyonder characteristic to appear. 2 minutes later, Emlyn suddenly looked up at the door. He heard footsteps. Immediately after that, he caught the scent of Argos. Why is this artificial vampire back? He returned midway. Emlyn White instantly became a little nervous, unsure how he was going to handle the issue. Thump. Argos knocked on the door from the outside without making a sound. This resulted in an abnormal silence. Emlyn was stunned. He immediately understood that Argos had caught scent of the blood and knew that something had happened inside. What should I do? Rush out and finish him? No, others will see me if I do so. I would then be caught by the official Beyonders. Emlyn instinctively took out a potion and planned on hiding himself again. Suddenly, he had an idea. Exhaling silently, Emlyn placed Gallus Kevin on the bed as he drank an invisibility potion and spewed out the corresponding amount of liquid. Slowly and very gently, he moved to a corner of the room and hid there. This way, it made it seem like the assassination was completed and that the murderer had long fled the scene. As time passed, aside from the occasional passing by of the residents, there was silence both inside and outside. Suddenly, Gallus Kevin's window creaked open as a pair of eyes shot its gaze inside. After careful inspection, Argos, with a festering face, leaped into the room and slowly walked to the corpse which was still indistinctly expelling the Beyonder characteristic. In the corner, Emlyn White secretly took out Lamino's travels while Argos wasn't looking in his direction. He flipped to another page of Lightning Strike. At this moment, Argos's sight landed on the bed and on his companion's head, as well as the stack of old newspapers and the tiny wooden chest. His pupils suddenly constricted. Chapter 796, Slowly Becoming Proficient Not Good. Emlyn White traced Argos's gaze and realized that he had forgotten to deal with the old newspapers and the tiny wooden chest. Although they were part of the room, they were placed in different parts of the room. Now, they were put together, making it appear rather odd. It was as though someone had wanted to do something with them before having to give up for the time being. Then, why would there be a need to give up? Was the person alarmed by the knocking of the door? That means that the murderer hadn't left and is hiding in a particular corner of the room? Similar thoughts flashed in Argos's and Emlyn's mind at the same time. However, one of them was feeling perplexed, while the other was reverse inferring the other party's thoughts. No good. The two vampires reacted at the same time as Argos lunged to the side as he emitted thick black gases that resembled a bat's wing. As for Emlyn White, his finger quickly swiped across the opened Lamino's travels. Suddenly, a silver hue appeared, illuminating the room again. The lightning that branched out didn't hit Argos and ended up hitting the ground beside the bed. It broke up into countless thin bolts that snaked towards conductive materials. Here, the wing which Argos used thick black gases to create seemed to attract the lightning. It was pursued by the snaking lightning as they struck him, spreading across his body. Argos became numb for a second and crashed down to the ground before he could leap up. Emlyn hurriedly flipped through Lamino's travels and once again slid his finger across a lightning strike page. Although he didn't know why there were so many pages of lightning strike, with them taking up nearly half of the yellowish-brown goatskin, he was overjoyed that he could keep using them. The silver bolts of lightning crashed down, smiting Argos, causing his body to emit black smoke despite having just recovered from his numbed state. Failing to leap away, his body began to convulse uncontrollably. Seizing this opportunity, Emlyn White bent his knee and leaped forward with his feet, approaching Argos with afterimages trailing behind him. Then, he wrapped his right arm around Target's head, easily flashing behind him. Gotcha! Argos directly saw his back. His eyes filled with blood as the few festering parts on his face burst open as deep and illusory darkness poured out from inside. Emlyn had no idea what had happened. He slid backward instinctively as he kept changing his positioning. Argos didn't pursue him as his eyes lost their rationality. All that was left was pure malicious intent, madness, and clear blankness. He raised his hands and pressed them against his head before forcefully twisting it, allowing it to return to its normal orientation with a crisp crack. And around this artificial vampire, the darkness surged as though it wanted to devour everything. Then, Argos stretched his neck from side to side as his body swelled and oozed out disgusting pus. He had come to Gallus Kevin tonight because his body had shown signs of losing control. There was a need to discuss a solution. He returned midway because he suddenly came to a realization that perhaps the harsh environment had caused intense negative effects to him due to his extraordinary sense of smell and sensitivity, thus, resulting in him having signs of losing control. And at that moment, he completely broke down with the shadow of death hanging over him. He had lost control. Emlyn White's heart palpitated when Argos swept his gaze across him. He felt that he had encountered trouble again as he couldn't help but curse the Primordial Moon's believers for often making themselves into monsters. He didn't immediately pray to Mr. Fool for two reasons. First, there wasn't any time as his opponent was about to launch an attack. Second, in a one-on-one situation, Emlyn believed that it wasn't too dangerous dealing with a sequenced 7 rampager. He made every second count by flipping through Lamino's travels quickly, letting it land on the page with lightning strike again. Pa! Thick, distorted bolts of silver lightning smote down heavily as it flailed its claws, striking the mutated Argos. At that moment, the lightning seemed to shatter the surging darkness, but it also seemed to be devoured by it. The two vanished at the same time, leaving behind Argos who had finally locked his sights onto Emlyn. This artificial vampire who had lost control produced afterimages as he pounced towards his target. Emlyn crouched down and rolled, dodging the lethal strike. At the same time, he reached his free right hand into his pocket and took out a metal bottle. Bam! As Argos quickly turned around, he instantly appeared near his enemy. Pa! Without any time to remove the cover, Emlyn clenched his fingers, pinching open a crack in the metal bottle. Then, he threw the bottle ahead, letting the pure and radiant liquid inside splatter towards the approaching Argos. This was sun water which he had concocted with his spirituality. It was extremely strong against vampires. This was the preparation that a potions professor had to do in advance. Ah! Being splashed by the liquid, Argos let out a blood-curdling scream. Wisps of black smoke billowed from his body as he lost his strength in midair. Bang! Although he collided with Emlyn, he failed to make him lose his balance. Emlyn tumbled twice but didn't suffer any actual damage. While tumbling, Emlyn ignored managing his injuries. He swatted his right hand which had made contact with a few drops of sun water and quickly flipped Lamino's travels. Pa! Another bolt of silver lightning smote down, causing Argos's tragic cries to come to an end. This vampire who had lost control had appeared to be suffering the radiance of the sun from a close distance as he fell into a state of intense paralysis. Emlyn seized this opportunity and took out another bottle of sun water. He unscrewed the cap and poured it towards his opponent. This time, Argos didn't even manage to let out a cry. His body began to melt like wax. It was only then that Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief. He then conjured a thick black fog behind him, turning it into illusory bats the size of a palm as they swarmed towards his target. The black bats landed on Argos, enveloping him completely. Following that, they separated and flew back to Emlyn before vanishing. Argos's body had shrunk quite noticeably, and he finally couldn't hold out any longer. In his half-melted state, he slowly collapsed. Only then did Emlyn raise his right hand to check on the remnant pain. He saw that his palm and a few fingers had wounds that were corroding. However, the flesh inside was rapidly squirming as they healed themselves. It's over. I actually finished him. Emlyn retracted his gaze and looked at Argos's corpse in slight disbelief. Although this hunt had quite a few ups and downs, he hadn't encountered any real danger the entire time. This made him realize that the existence of the Tarot Club made him far stronger than he imagined. If Argos had checked Gallus Kevin's corpse first and not noticed the newspapers and wooden chest, he definitely would have figured out that I possess beyonder powers like lightning strike. He wouldn't have used wings of darkness while dodging and end up being hit by the lightning. But this way, he wouldn't have discovered any abnormalities and wouldn't have made any evasive maneuvers ahead of time. My lightning strike would have struck him directly and things would have been easier. Viewing it from this angle, no matter what happened, would be able to kill him as long as I didn't make a mistake in my handling of matters. They're really weak. So I'm already this powerful. It's no wonder the ancestor made me join the Tarot Club. This is a gathering that prepares the various races for the impending apocalypse. It's of a much higher level than the other secret organizations. Emlyn tipped his chin up a little as he couldn't help but curl his lips. Following that, he heard footsteps outside, but no one dared to approach. Argos's scream must have alarmed the surrounding residents, but they wouldn't dare enter because they're afraid of trouble. However, someone will definitely report it to the police. I need to clear the scene as quickly as possible and leave. Emlyn retracted his gaze from the door and walked to Gallus Kevin's corpse. From the pooling blood, he picked up an item the size of a fist. It was completely red in color and resembled a heart. It was expanding and contracting slightly, and its surface was translucent. He could vaguely see a liquid flowing inside, and it was none other than the beyonder characteristic of a sequenced 7 vampire of the apothecary pathway. This is my trophy. Emlyn momentarily felt unaccustomed to it. After calming himself, he wrapped the beyonder characteristic and Gallus Kevin's head with the old newspapers and stuffed it into the wooden chest. After placing the wooden chest to the side, he yanked Argos's head whose form looked nothing like before. He then took out another bottle of medicine and scattered in every corner of the room. During this process, Emlyn wasn't flustered at all. It was as though he wasn't worried that the official beyonders in East Borough would rush over. A few minutes later, he picked up Argos's mutated beyonder characteristic, glancing at its surface, which was nearly black in color, and the indistinct human-faced patterns. Behind him, a black gas was emanated. The black gas transformed into countless tiny bats again as they flew within the room. They combined with the potion liquid that had been sprayed earlier, forming a silent black flame that spread outwards. The black flames burned away the blood and corpse, as well as the traces of the lightning strikes. All that was left was a layer of sticky liquid that resembled asphalt covering the different objects in the room. Then, these liquid bodies turned into heavy black bats as they spiraled around Emlyn's body. Emlyn didn't have extravagant hopes that his actions could completely interfere in subsequent investigations. He only had one goal: to make the situation look okay. This made the police or official beyonders who took on the case write off the matter as something of little value. After a simple investigation, they would file it away and not pay any further attention to it. After doing all of this, Emlyn, with his cap and blackened face, surveyed the room. Following that, he bowed slightly at the crimson moon. Meanwhile, he flipped the pages of Lamino's Travels and had it stop at teleportation. Emlyn's figure, along with the heavy bats, immediately turned transparent and formless as he vanished from the spot. After nearly 15 minutes, a few policemen from East Borough rushed in. They crashed through the door but didn't discover any residents or corpses. They yawned languidly and forced the onlooking residents to admit that they had been hallucinating, thus, ending the investigation. This was the efficiency and style of the East Borough police. After leaving East Borough, Emlyn first headed home and hid Lamino's Travels. Then, with his spoils, he headed straight for Odora's house in West Borough. He wanted to declare his victory and claim his reward. Chapter 797, Reward. Inside Odora's villa, Emlyn saw Cosme, who was also a baron like he was. This sanguine who seemed like a man in his prime was Nibs, Odora's spokesperson. "I'm also a baron, and one that recently achieved adulthood at that," Emlyn mumbled inwardly. He got up from the sofa in the activity room and bowed. "Good evening, my lord." Cosme was just about to say something when his nose twitched. He then cast his gaze towards the wooden chest beside Emlyn's feet. "The smell of fresh blood?" As he asked in puzzlement, he seemed to connect the dots and added after a second of thought, "You killed another target?" Emlyn curled his lips and shook his head. "No." Then, before Cosme could ask further, his smile turned profound. "Not one, but two." "Two?" The middle-aged gentleman was taken aback as he watched Emlyn bend down to open the lid. During this process, Emlyn's facial muscles winced a little as this series of actions had touched the wound on his right hand. Holding back the change in his expression, Emlyn allowed his arm to hang down slightly, allowing the chest to tilt and reveal its contents to the sanguine baron opposite him. Two charred, bloody heads were stuffed inside a pile of old newspapers. By the side were two transparent objects which resembled hearts, one red with vitality, and the other nearly black. This impactful scene was reflected in Cosme's eyes as he looked up in surprise, staring at Emlyn blankly as he blurted, "You did this?" Although he had only managed to recognize one head being Gallus Kevin's, but the two vampire Beyonder characteristics couldn't be faked. Emlyn put down the wooden chest and allowed his right hand to hang down naturally. Surreptitiously, he flicked his right hand very slightly along the corners of his trousers as he replied with a smile, "Of course. This is the thing, after receiving the £7,000 reward back then, I bought a particular baron's legacy at a particular Beyonder gathering. With it, I advanced. I don't wish to use money to satisfy the murderers who hunt us sanguine, but I didn't wish for this legacy to land in the hands of others. Besides, the seller wasn't necessarily the hunter." Taking this opportunity, Emlyn revealed the fact that he had already become a baron. Furthermore, every word he said was the truth. This was a technique he had learned from the Tarot Club. "I long knew that you were a baron. Do you think your frequent purchases of all kinds of items with spirituality and the borrowing of books that explain potions would go unnoticed? If it weren't because of certain factors, we would have questioned you long ago. What I'm surprised about is your combat ability. You don't even have a single mystical item, and with you only wishing to buy dolls, it's not easy to hunt two artificial vampires without causing a commotion, even for a baron. Even I would need to make plenty of preparations and acquire detailed intelligence before it's possible. Without anyone noticing it, Emlyn is already this strong?" Cosme Odora couldn't help but lampoon as he revealed a fake smile. "So that's the reason. Emlyn, why did you hide it from us? Don't you wish to be addressed as Lord by the other sanguine?" Emlyn glanced at the sanguine's expression and tilted his chin. "I was planning on telling everyone, but since there was the hunting competition, I decided to give everyone a surprise. Cosme, I've already hunted 3 of the primordial moon believers, and you gave 5 targets. Does this mean that I've won?" He couldn't wait to change his form of address from Lord to Cosme. Cosme's eyelids twitched as he chuckled. "Yes, that's right. You can ignore the 2 other targets. Leave it to Russ Bathory and the rest. This way, they might still be eligible for a consolation prize." Having said that, Cosme found his attitude a little too cold, so he hurriedly asked in concern, "Were you injured?" "A little." Emlyn raised his right arm and stretched his fingers. To be frank, on his hunt that night, the worst injury he suffered was after he teleported out of East Borough. He had ripped apart his skin to wipe his blood across the cover of Lamino's Travels. Cosme didn't develop the topic as he said after a few seconds of silence, "Congratulations on being the victor of this hunting competition. You will receive 2 prizes. First, if there's a chance to become a viscount in the future, you will enter the final list of candidates, receiving free help for the ritual. Second, you will obtain a mystical item. It's a ring personally created by the ancestor. Although it doesn't contain any godhood, it possesses potent and very mystical powers. As the ancestor didn't name it, we all call it Lilith's ring. Also, according to convention, these 2 Beyonder characteristics will belong to the entire sanguine race. This way, we might be able to have 2 more newborns, and you would receive £3,000 in cash in return. A ring personally created made by the ancestor. Although Emlyn was somewhat disappointed that the reward wasn't a Viscount's Beyonder characteristic, with it only being candidature and a free ritual, the ring made by sanguine ancestor Lilith herself was enough to put things right. To a proud sanguine with a sense of racial superiority, this was the highest form of honor. As his joy was quelled, Emlyn, who had participated in several tarot gatherings and had completed 2 hunts, felt that things weren't that simple. I was sent by the ancestor to Mr. Fool, and now, I'm receiving a ring from the ancestor? Isn't that too much of a coincidence? Emlyn thought for a moment and couldn't figure out the answer. He finally decided to pray to Mr. Fool later, describe the entire situation, and see what advice he could give him. Noticing that Emlyn's joy had subsided and that he had remained silent for more than 10 seconds, Cosme cleared his throat. That ring and the cash will be given to you tomorrow. When the time comes, I'll summon Russ Bathory and company, officially announcing your victory in this hunting competition. Then, the ring will be given to you. No problem. Although Emlyn lacked the experience in such matters, he knew that rewards couldn't be given in private. It needed to be given in front of all the participants. Without staying any longer, he bade farewell and left Odora's villa in a rental carriage. As the carriage slowly drove off, Emlyn took a look at the crimson moon which was hanging silently in the sky. His mind gradually calmed as he couldn't help but recall everything that happened that very day. From that, he concluded lessons and gained experience. Finally, he began counting how many Beyonder powers he needed to record onto Lamino's travels. I used all of the 5 lightning strikes. 1 teleportation, 1 door opening, 1 astromancy. A total of 8 times. In addition to that, I need to pay 2 additional powers, making it 10. This will be a little difficult. There are some Beyonder powers that probably can't be recorded, for example, my self-recovery powers. I can only repeat them. After I obtain the ancestor's ring, I can try recording the Beyonder powers it possesses. Lilith's ring? Above the grey fog in the palace that looked like a giant's residence, Klein sat in the high-back chair belonging to the Fool as he quietly pondered over Emlyn White's prayer. He had originally imagined that he would be woken up in the middle of the night, having to provide a particular inexperienced vampire help, but to his surprise, Emlyn had finished everything by 11 and had even submitted the mission in. Back then, Emlyn prayed to the Fool because of a revelation from the ancient god, Lilith. Now, he has received her ring. Regardless of who Lilith is, I need to be wary and observe. Klein seriously contemplated for a few seconds before replying to Emlyn's prayer in a staid manner. When praying to me or participating in the gathering in the future, take off that ring. After giving his instructions, Klein returned to the real world. Without worrying about being woken up in the middle of the night, he slept till daybreak. After breakfast and taking a rest, it was time for his etiquette lessons with Wiana. It was a special lesson for the ball he was hosting at his residence on the weekend. Wahana's soft black hair flowed as the ends of her dress twirled while she led Dwayne Dantes into familiarizing himself with the opening dance. In the brisk and comforting music, this etiquette teacher suddenly said, "I heard Ma'am Mary visited you yesterday afternoon?" "Yes." As Klein poignantly reflected on how there weren't any secrets in the world of social networks, he nodded frankly. Wiana nodded gently and said after 2 seconds of silence, "I heard that Ma'am Mary has pledged all her shares to the bank to borrow a large sum of money." This is a warning for me to be careful, so that I wouldn't fall into a scam. The help I previously provided had not only allowed me to quickly enter the social circles in Buckland Street, but it has also continuously brought me benefits. However, Ma'am Mary's pledging of shares was to secretly acquire more shares. Klein listened in silence before revealing a warm smile. Thank you. He paused and added, I believe in the character of every friend, but in the field of business, caution is forever the first principle. I've already gotten Walter to hire an independent lawyer and accounting team to perform the due diligence, and come up with a proposal that can protect my interests and avoid taxes in the best way possible. Before that, I won't make any decisions. Wiana raised her head a little and looked into Dwayne Dantes's deep blue eyes before suddenly sighing with a laugh. You truly are a wise person. Klein originally wanted to attribute it to maturity, but thinking back to how Wahana's husband had previously been in a scam over his cloth, and he had only managed to reduce his losses thanks to him, such an answer easily made her imagine things and make comparisons. Since it would appear like a mockery, he changed his excuse and said with a chuckle, my wisdom comes from the lessons I've received in the past. It's hard to imagine you being duped. Wiana chuckled as she lowered her head. Is it due to all your experiences that you can appreciate the different kinds of charms for all kinds of ladies? When is this rumor ever going to end? Klein said with a helpless smile, every flower has something beautiful about it. After familiarizing himself with the entire process and the corresponding dance, Klein walked Wiana out. Together with his valet, Richardson, he took up Ma'am Mary's invitation and headed for the coin company in Sherwood Borough. Chapter 798, Revisiting an Old Haunt. Sherwood Borough, outside the coin company. When Klein alighted from the carriage, he looked around as if he had never been here before, as though everything had a strong sense of novelty. In fact, he wasn't a stranger to the area. He knew that opposite the street was the Gardley department store where the middle class enjoyed patronizing, and that there was a shop not far away that was famous for its specialty desi pies. He had once spent a considerable amount of time here waiting for Daraga Gale to tail him so as to obtain evidence to his acts of adultery. Retracting his gaze, Klein walked towards the coin company with Richardson. Ma'am Mary and her lady's maid were already waiting there. In the relatively conservative Lone Kingdom, a lady servant had to be of the same sex, otherwise, it would result in nasty gossip, affecting her social relationships and marriage. Therefore, even though Ma'am Mary's lady's maid needed to play the role of her secretary to a certain extent, with her understanding societal etiquette, commercial knowledge, and having a certain level of negotiation skill, all she could do was select from women with good education or with relevant working experience without considering any men. Similarly, gentlemen needed to have valets and commercial secretaries of the same sex. Of course, even so, there were always people who couldn't rein themselves in and engaged in immoral acts. Every year, there were cases of servants and their employers having relations. Amongst them, the maids were mostly the victims. They were either cheated, forced, or enticed to become the male employer's lover. When they were eventually discovered, they would be fired, losing their jobs. Then, their reputation would be destroyed, making them ineligible options for servants again. Many a time, they had to become prostitutes. Good afternoon, Dwayne. Ma'am Mary welcomed him with a smile. Klein bowed and said, Good afternoon, ma'am. It really is a flourishing area. Such a topic was roughly equivalent to talking about the weather. After Mary exchanged pleasantries with him, she led Dwayne Dantes through the coin company's entrance and said with a smile, Later, there will be professionals giving you an explanation as they show you around. After about half an hour, head on up. I've prepared a buffet and invited a few friends in different circles. Friends in different circles. This is her trying to expand my social circle. Very sincere. Klein nodded slightly and said, As someone not from the area, I always look forward to knowing more friends, having just come to Backland. No, you're nothing like that. If I had the liberty of saying it, you're a true Backlund gentleman who has received excellent education, ma'am, Mary replied politely. As they conversed, they passed through the door and entered the reception area, which had excellent lighting. A stocky man in a suit with a beautiful mustache stood there waiting. This is Luke Sammer. He is our coin company's first manager. Mary introduced him to Dwayne Dantes. Actually, I know him. Klein looked at Luke and nodded with a smile. To him, Luke Sammer was a rather staid, professional gentleman. He enjoyed machinery and was a very gentlemanly person at banquets. He didn't belittle the poor detective who had yet to make a name for himself, nor did he deliberately curry favor with the few mid-ranking civil servants of the Backlund Municipal Department that lived on Minsk Street. This is my friend, Dwayne Dantes. He's interested in anthracite and high-quality charcoal. Help me give him a detailed explanation, Mary said to Luke. Luke, who had been informed ahead of time, took a step forward and looked at the tycoon from Desi Bay. He gave a warm smile and said respectfully, Mr. Dantes, this is the coin company's headquarters. We have long-term agreements with several anthracite mines. We supply Sherwood, Hillston, North, and Westboro with anthracite and high-quality charcoal, satisfying 30% of their overall demand. We also have the chance of clinching a huge contract with the Navy. I've never seen Luke with such an expression. Klein followed him around Coin Company with an unperturbed expression as he listened to Luke introduce the various areas. From time to time, he would inquire without expressing his attitude. Half an hour later, they went up to the second floor and entered a huge meeting room. The place was already set up with tables clinging close to the walls. Plates of food were randomly placed on them, with mainly ham, smoked meat, sausages, bread, salad, cakes, pudding, and other cold dishes. However, there were a few hot dishes. Just as he stepped in, Dwayne Dantes was introduced to two men who were talking close to Mary. This is reporter Mike Joseph from the Daily Observer. This is an excellent surgeon, Dr. Aaron Series. In Backlund, you will often need them. As Klein listened to Mary, he smiled at the two gentlemen, the corners of his lips nearly twitching. These are all friends I'm very familiar with. Well, I'm even more familiar with the fetus in the womb of Aaron's wife. Why does that sound wrong? As Klein lampooned, he patiently waited for Mary to introduce Dwayne Dantes to the two men before politely greeting Mike and Aaron. Mike Joseph didn't look much different from last year. He had thin brows, rough skin, and charming blue eyes. As for Aaron Series, although he was intrinsically a cold and reserved person, he didn't make it obvious. Everything that happened in the recent half-year had been smooth for him. In terms of mood and confidence, he was riding a high. Upon hearing that Dantes was a tycoon from Desi, Mike took out his name card and handed it over with a smile. You don't mind me advertising, right? If you wish to publish an advertisement, find me. Be it the Daily Observer or the Tussock Times, I can provide you with a discounted price. As he spoke, Mike winked, indicating that he was joking. You are nothing but a reporter with all these fake identification documents. Why didn't you mention the discount price advertisements to Sherlock Moriarty in the past? You were looking down on the detective, were you? Klein lampooned and exchanged name cards with him. I've always had such needs. Following that, he turned to Aaron and handed another name card to him. I was recently ill and recovered only recently. I'm very aware of how important a doctor is. I'm a surgeon, so I believe you wouldn't wish to meet me that much. Despite saying so, Aaron still received the name card. No, I'd love to meet you. I even wish to join the party of your child's birth. Klein mumbled, deliberately leading the conversation to the field of medicine and having a good conversation with Mike and Aaron. He had previously been stressing over how to close ties with Aaron to re-establish connections with a particular unborn fetus. After all, the paper crane was about to tear at any moment, making it unusable for even one more attempt. As for Sherlock Moriarty, it was difficult for him to openly appear in Backland to pay Aaron a visit, much less participate in the birth party. There aren't any problems now. With Ma'am Mary's introduction, I can very naturally get close to Aaron. When the time comes, I'll definitely be invited. Hee, I might even be made the godfather of a particular snake of Mercury. After all, we are all believers of the goddess. Will this make a particular fetus angry? I'd better be careful. I definitely wouldn't mention this unless Aaron mentions it. Klein thought in delight. He skillfully held himself back without appearing overly passionate on their first meeting. After a simple chat, he was introduced to the other guests by Mary. During this process, Klein didn't forget to get some food and water, making him appear to easily adapt himself to the environment. After completing a round, Mary stopped and said after some deliberation, "Everyone here is my friend. This means that you didn't invite anyone from the other camp, and you are also including me as your friend?" Klein nodded gently. "I probably shouldn't ask as a gentleman, but as a businessman, I need to know who is the person, or who are the people, vying for the coin company's controlling share rights?" Mary fell silent for 2 seconds. Baron Sindras and his friends. They wish to publicly list the coin company and earn the sky-high evaluation that will eventually happen. They're completely unconcerned with the company's future development. Baron Sindras, one of the richest men in Lone. By donating to the Conservative Party, he became an aristocrat and is a banker, factory owner, and a powerful businessman. It's hard to tell where he stands, so even though he relied on the Conservative Party to obtain his aristocratic title, he's more aligned with the new party while being biased towards merchants. Klein thought and asked with a smile, "Why didn't you get that Mr. Hall to help? His father is a powerful noble and banker. He should be able to provide you with the necessary help." Mary said with a wry smile, "Mr. Hall doesn't wish to involve himself in this matter. He claims to be the chief secretary of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, so he can't be involved in commercial activities that deal with anthracite or charcoal. A man whose true ambitions lie in politics. However, he probably doesn't wish to be at odds with Baron Sindras. If I were to choose another butler back then, I'd likely have established ties with Baron Sindras. He's so rich, so if he really wants to raise the price, I wouldn't be able to beat him. Will a trope of him using money to crush me appear?" Klein didn't ask further as he said, "I will wait for the investigation report." Realizing that Dwayne Dantes wasn't directly backing out, Mary said with slight gratitude, "In this age, chivalrous people are already few and far between. You are one of them." Klein smiled without promising anything. After the buffet was over, he began returning to Northborough on his high-end four-wheeled carriage. As he daydreamed while looking out the window, Klein suddenly said to Richardson, "Turn toward St. Samuel Cathedral." He had failed to figure out the exact answer to the reason for the anomaly in the cathedral, which was later quelled. This made him wonder if he should find a chance to make contact with the keepers. He also remembered that every afternoon, there would at least be a keeper who prayed to the goddess in the prayer hall. How should I make contact? In that environment, even a conversation will appear noisy. And this will easily incur the suspicion of others. Klein frowned slightly as he decided to observe before coming up with a solution. The carriage didn't change direction as it continued driving towards Buckland Street, but it didn't stop and instead continued past it. Inside the carriage, Klein closed his eyes to calm his slightly anxious feelings. Chapter 799, Spying Northborough, St. Samuel Cathedral. Just as Klein entered the main prayer hall, he used the points of light that shone from the back of the altar to survey his surroundings, taking in all the believers inside. In one glance, Klein rapidly locked onto a target. He followed the aisle and walked forward without showing any abnormal signs. In the first row was an elder wearing a black clergyman's robe, but he exuded a cold aura. His face was pale, and his hair was withered and yellow. He had his eyes closed tightly as he prayed with great focus. He was one of the keepers that Klein had previously sensed. His shift is usually on Friday. Klein didn't approach him and instead sat 2 pews away from him. After finding a spot to sit down, he handed over his hat and cane to Richardson. Then, while sitting down, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger twice, silently activating his spirit-body thread's vision. Suddenly, black illusory threads appeared in front of Klein as they densely extended out of different spirit bodies endlessly. Having just taken his seat, Klein shifted his gaze, casting it onto the keeper. He nearly exclaimed from what he saw, but thanks to his self-control as a clown, and his ability to expect abnormal situations, he managed to relax and maintain his staid attitude. In his vision, although the yellow-haired elder had spirit-body threads extending out, his body was entirely black in color on the inside as the darkness swallowed the origins of the illusory threads in a way that was completely different from ordinary Beyonders. Indeed, they have already been eroded by the core seal, causing a mutation at the level of the soul. From the looks of it, the problem is closer to my second guess. They are, in a sense, part of the core seal. Once they show signs of losing control, they will immediately trigger the item's instinctive reaction that forcefully quells them. It's no wonder the keepers need to be a voluntary role and be advanced in their years. They probably understand the outcome. Klein sighed as he prepared to deactivate his spirit-body thread senses and retract his gaze. At this moment, he saw a pair of eyes. They were black without any emotions within. Beside the eyes, there were pronounced wrinkles that extended bit by bit, as though they were distorted, strange mysterious symbols. They were the keeper's eyes. At some point in time, he had straightened his body, turned around, and looked blankly at Dwayne Dantes. Klein's scalp instantly went numb as he forced a smile and nodded at him as though it was a normal meeting of eyes. The keeper slowly moved his head as a response. Then, Klein felt as though he was extracted from his surroundings as things turned blurry before turning clear. At that instant, he knew that he had been pulled into a dream. Hence, as he maintained his image as Dwayne Dantes, he sized up his surroundings, only to realize that he was still inside St. Samuel Cathedral. However, all the pews were either damaged or overturned and strewn everywhere. It looked as though it had met with a raid. The altar up ahead was filled with cracks and weeds. The thick layer of dust made it seem like it had been in such desolate conditions since a long time ago. The keeper with yellow, withered hair was in front of the collapsed donation box, coldly staring at Dwayne Dantes, who was suited in black. Upon seeing Klein look over, he widened his mouth to reveal white, sharp, irregular teeth. And these teeth were embedded with blurry, indistinct, and tiny figures. They had complete facial features and limbs, and their expressions were different but were colored with the same pain as though they were imprisoned there and unable to escape. Grunt, the keeper's throat let out a growl that sounded like a beast as his back hunched over. By his spine and waist, his clothes swelled as 4 blood vessel-covered arms without any skin grew out. Right on the heels of that, they grew fine black hair as the tips of his fingers grew sharp nails with a smacking sound. In just 3 short seconds, the keeper who looked normal had turned into an 8-legged monster that sprawled on the ground. It looked like a spider that had silently woven its web in the night while awaiting its prey, and also like a deformed black wolf that struck intense fear into one's heart. Meanwhile, 2 gigantic palms filled with black hair extended out of the desolate altar without any warning. They pressed onto the sides as black gas condensed into slippery tentacles that extended in every direction. Soon, they filled the entire prayer hall. The aura that left him trembling, the extreme sense of fear, and the huge, illusory figure were penetrating an invisible barrier as they manifested more clearly. He lost control? That keeper lost control? Klein stood there, subconsciously wishing to react and use his uniqueness to forcibly escape the dream, but suddenly, he figured out the series of events that had happened. His expression changed as he wore a terrified expression as he ran to the door, trembling. it looked like he was struggling in a dream. In the time it took to take a breath, a dark chill spread out from the outside world like a tidal wave, inundating the entire dream and quelling everything. Klein snapped his eyes open and realized that he had fallen asleep at some point in time. As for the yellow-haired keeper, he had long turned his head to continue praying. Dwayne Dantes' eyes darted around as he looked around in horror, as though he was still immersed in the dream and unable to escape the horror that had gripped him. After nearly a minute, he took 2 deep breaths and looked at the sacred emblem again, drawing a sign of the crimson moon on his chest. Only then did Klein have the time to recall the experience he had and began speculating as to what had happened. As I had spied on his spirit-body threads, it caused him to show signs of losing control, thus, causing an excessive reaction by pulling me into a dream and attempting to deal with me. Later, the core seal behind Cheney's gate sensed the anomaly and quelled the problem. Now, the crux of the matter is if the keeper still remembers the source of his near mutation. If he's already used to it, he should find the cause of the problem very vague considering his present state. Of course, it might not be my problem. Perhaps he was already on the brink of losing control. Klein looked at the elder once again to observe what he would do next to determine how he should react. If all else fails, I'll directly use creeping hunger and escape with traveling. Klein rapidly made up his mind as he patiently waited for the possible repercussions. A few minutes later, he saw Bishop Electra walk in from the side door towards him. Klein's heart tightened as he spread open his left fingers in preparation to activate creeping hunger. At that moment, he suddenly had an idea and stopped his actions. If the keeper has already informed the bishops about my problematic situation via a dream, I would be the victim of a collective assault by the church's beyonders. After all, pulling me into a dream can avoid harming the other believers. Therefore, they have no need to find a bishop I'm familiar with to come over. It's likely more to extend their regards and to placate me. Klein retracted his gaze and continued a praying pose. In less than a minute, he finally sensed someone approach as he looked up and saw Bishop Electra softly say, "You don't look too well." I fell asleep without realizing it and had a nightmare. I still feel a little afraid, Klein said with a self-deprecating smile. Bishop Electra sat beside him and said in a staid manner, "Dreams are sometimes the manifestation of the fear within you. You will feel better as long as you sincerely pray to the goddess and consume holy water. Of course, the most important thing is to not suppress yourself usually. Learn to confess to the goddess. At times, wailing in secret can reduce a lot of your stress." Klein secretly observed the bishop's attitude and read his tone before heaving a sigh of relief. "I understand." He cast his gaze forward again, bowed his head, and clasped his hands to begin praying silently. While doing so, he saw the keeper in front of him stand up and walk to the side door where a bishop was waiting. Phew! Klein silently exhaled as he truly became one with the serene environment. Suddenly, he heard a voice that was his, but it wasn't something that he could control. "Did you think what you did was well hidden?" "No. Not at all. Have you forgotten that you've touched the Evernight Goddess's holy artifact?" Chapter 800, Psychologically Becoming Better. Who is it? Who is the one speaking? Klein's muscles tensed up as he nearly opened his eyes. At that moment, his back oozed with sweat that soaked his shirt. What he was most alarmed of wasn't the word said, but that it directly sounded in his heart and had modulated the voice to sound exactly like his. Although I maintained my lucidity in that dream, I still had my spirit body tainted by his psyche that was on the verge of losing control? Or is someone using that keeper to pass me a message? Countless guesses ran through Klein's mind. Finally, combining the contents of what was said and his own situation, he came up with a preliminary judgment. The number of people who knows about my identity as Klein Moretti is few to begin with. Likewise for those who know that Klein Moretti had once sworn an oath while touching a holy artifact. Furthermore, there's almost no intersection between the two. Mr. Azik had heard me mention the former matter before, but if he wants to give me any reminders, he can directly do it through a messenger. There's no need to use such a frightening method. Will Oseptin might know, after all, he's a snake of Mercury who represents fate. But by the same logic, he can directly contact me. Of course, I can eliminate the possibility that he suddenly had the thought of frightening me. I just thought in the afternoon about having a chance of becoming his godfather. The Antigonus family's notebook had corrupted the keeper, just like how it used the misfortune cloth puppet to deliver the symbol. But if it really is the Antigonus family's notebook, why didn't it just give me the potion formula directly? Or try negotiating with me to help in a notebook jailbreak? St. Samuel Cathedral is the headquarters of the Baclund Diocese, making it at a higher level than St. Selena Cathedral. That notebook shouldn't have the ability to do anything further. It should be securely sealed. Apart from them, there is only one entity who is aware of both matters, the Evernight Goddess. However, with a deity's pride, she has no need to pretend to act as a passerby to call me out with a polite and estranged tone. I'm in St. Samuel Cathedral, so all she needs to do is produce a revelation, and dozens of beyonders will appear to mow me down. And as a diocese headquarters, with sufficient preparation, they can probably disrupt traveling, therefore, there's no need to go through so much trouble. There's still one more person who's aware of both matters. That's myself. Before planning my operation, I've actually considered the corresponding problem. Back then, my conclusion was that I didn't need to worry too much about it because only after advancing to Faceless will some of the Grey Fog's powers enter the real world, allowing certain demigods to sense my uniqueness. Before this, only Beyonders from the monster pathway could discover a tiny bit of my uniqueness, and back when I touched the holy sword and made that oath, I had yet to become a clown. Just because of the secret connection established from the oath, it made the goddess slowly sense something about me. It's been so long, and I haven't seen her take any action. That female angel, she should be an angel. She had even smiled at me when she wiped away Mr. A. Therefore, the goddess might be happy to see me take away the Antigonus family's notebook. Although I'm not sure of her motives, I can only accept it and subsequently think of ways to deal with it at my current level. This is ultimately safer than climbing the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. Of course, that's built on the premise that the lady which wiped away Mr. A is an angel of the church. Although I had undergone all kinds of acting during the Faceless stage and got to know myself well, I've consumed additional potions without completely digesting them. And marionettist requires every marionette to adhere to a specific persona. This also easily causes a personality dissociation. Also, to steal the Antigonus family's notebook and to act as Dwayne Dantes, I'm under immense stress. I am subconsciously wavering and am suspicious. In this state, the keeper's corrupted psyche of nearly losing control had agitated my spirit body, causing me to have a split personality? Just as Klein thought of this, the familiar yet unfamiliar voice resounded in his mind again. Your considerations are too idealized. All of your actions are fundamentally all thanks to luck. If that high-ranking deacon, Christet Sesamir, with the Holy Sword was here in Baclund to handle Beyonder cases, can you guarantee that the Holy Sword wouldn't sense you when you are in the same cathedral? Both of you are linked by an oath. If Deacon Sesamir were to come, I'll abandon this plan. Besides, it's also not possible to avoid it ahead of time. I'll find an excuse or reason to be out of town for some time. Klein mumbled inwardly. Then, he heard the voice belonging to himself sound in his mind. This makes it a situation prone to too many accidents and unpredictable developments. Before coming to the cathedral, didn't you also not consider that the mere observation of spirit-body threads would result in a mutation? My nervousness back then was the anxiety that something happened beyond my expectations. However, as it's a mere observation without me making any direct contact, I didn't believe that there would be too great a problem. I should be more cautious in the future. Also, accidents and developments exist for everything. Who exactly are you? Klein closed his eyes as he pretended to focus on praying. The voice hesitated and said, I'm Klein. You are Zhou Mingrui. No, I'm Zhou Mingrui. You are Klein, indeed. Klein felt his hair stand on end once again. He decided to leave St. Samuel Cathedral immediately, return home, and resolve the problem of his character dissociation. When the symptoms first appear, the situation is easier to resolve. Once the other personality stabilizes and becomes stronger, it will begin to snatch control of the body. I might even need external help when that happens. He opened his eyes and looked at Electra with a tranquil expression. I feel like I've calmed down. Ever since I got a mental illness, my mind is a lot better. As he spoke, Klein inwardly gave a self-deprecating comment. He enjoyed lampooning, partially because it was in his character to do so, and partially to enforce his personality. It was ultimately to remind himself who he was, so as not to lose himself to his acting. Bishop Electra smiled. May the goddess bless you. As he spoke, he took a cup of water from a priest's hand and passed it to Dwayne Dantes. Without any explanation needed, Klein knew that it was holy water. He often drank it in the past, hence, hiding his anxiety, he received it in a composed manner and downed it. A refreshing feeling slushed down his throat, jolting his mind as he became a lot more awake. Even the voice in his mind weakened. This has the effect of placating the spirit body. The Church does view Dwayne Dantes with great importance. Of course, this is created by their beyonders. As Klein nodded at Bishop Electra, he drew the sign of the Crimson Moon and staidly walked to the altar and donated £50 into the donation box. After doing everything, he led Richardson and left the cathedral, riding the carriage back to Buckland Street. On his trip back, he didn't feed the pigeons, because an ordinary person who had just encountered something would hardly have the peace of mind to do so. After returning home, the silent Klein used the excuse of an afternoon nap to dismiss his servants. In his master bedroom's bathroom, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and headed above the grey fog. Passing through the roars and ravings, he didn't feel his body be purified. He was increasingly certain that the voice in his mind originated from himself. It was a result of being corrupted and agitated, causing a character dissociation. Sitting in the high-back chair of the fool, Klein immediately studied his spirit-body situation. He discovered that there were some signs of chaos without it being pure. The corresponding aura colors were somewhat spotted. After seriously contemplating for 2 minutes and ignoring the echoing noise in his head, Klein conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow and made him devoutly pray, Honorable Mr. Fool. Please inform the moon that I wish to rent the mental terror candle for half a day. I know he has the means of obtaining it. Very early on, his identity as the world had been prepared for Sherlock Moriarty, so Klein wasn't worried about it. South of the bridge, Harvest Church. Emlyn White, who was anticipating his obtaining of Lilith's ring in the evening, suddenly saw the endless grey fog and heard the world. Alarmed, he muttered in silence, how does he know that I can get the mental terror candle? Chapter 801, Plea. After a brief moment of stupefaction, Emlyn couldn't help but look around. He suspected that the world was lurking around him, as though he was one of the nearby believers. After all, he had never mentioned the mental terror candle at the Tarot Club. Bishop Yutravsky seldom had conflicts with others, so he almost never used any mystical items. If it wasn't because Emlyn had been planted with a psychological cue to frequently head to the Harvest Church and received the heads-up from Sherlock Moriarty, he wouldn't have asked the bishop and learned of the existence of the mental terror candle. At that instant, everyone looked like the world to Emlyn. Be it the plump middle-aged man, the granny with a grey headscarf, or the fashionable beauty, he felt that all of them looked like they had something similar to the world. No, I must figure it out. He's actually so aware of my surroundings. I haven't mentioned certain things even while in front of Mr. Fool. Emlyn was left in utter shock as he stood up and walked to the clergyman's break room at the back. In a quiet and empty environment, he replied, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to directly communicate with the world." In less than 10 seconds, Emlyn saw a dark red glow surge forward like a tidal wave and devour him. Then, he found himself back above the grey fog. He was inside the majestic palace and was seated at his seat. And at the other end of the model table was the blurry figure of the world who was waiting for him. Compared to before, Emlyn had changed tremendously. He wasn't in a rush to speak to the world, and he instead bowed to Mr. Fool, who was leisurely watching at the other end of the table, before looking at his target. "How did you know that I can get the mental terror candle?" Under Klein's control, the world said with a hoarse laugh, "We might have met before." He didn't speak further and only mentioned the key point. As for whether Emlyn could figure out the situation, that wasn't his problem. Of course, Klein believed that Emlyn lacked the ability to connect the world to Sherlock Moriarty since he lacked the necessary clues. Emlyn frowned bit by bit as he had a few targets of suspicion, but he wasn't able to determine who was the world. "Believe me, I have no ill intentions towards the members of the Tarot Club," the world added when he saw Emlyn in a state of prolonged silence. There will be a day when I'll find you." Emlyn silently muttered to himself as he asked, "What are you going to do with the mental terror candle? I need to have a substantial reason to borrow such a mystical item." Klein controlled his urge to rub his temples as he made the world turn solemn and say, "To treat my psychological problems." Treat psychological problems. Emlyn couldn't help but shrink his body back before straightening it again. Looking back at the world, his eyes clearly indicated that the world really was a dangerous lunatic. The mental terror candle does have such effects, Emlyn thought for a moment and said, "I can only borrow it for half a day. There wouldn't be any problems, right?" Klein held back the horror and pleas that were running through his mind as he controlled the world to answer, "No problem." If the mental terror candle was effective, Klein could finish the problem in 15 minutes. If it wasn't of any use, it would be the same even if he possessed it for days or months. Therefore, the rental duration wasn't critical. He didn't mind such restrictions at all. Emlyn did a count and said, "The rental fee will cost £300, as well as 5 pages of Beyonder Powers in Lamino's Travels." He decided to outsource half of the debt he had. 5 pages. How many pages did this fellow use? As Klein lampooned, he made the world reply, "That wouldn't be an issue." After closing the deal, Emlyn immediately returned to the real world and walked into the Harvest Church's break room for the clergyman. Casting his gaze to the side of the altar and waiting for Bishop Yutravsky to finish talking to the believers, Emlyn suddenly fell into a dilemma. Although he sounded confident in front of the world, he had never tried borrowing similar items from the bishop. He had no idea what kind of attitude the bishop would have. As his gaze darted around, Emlyn subconsciously surveyed the tiny prayer hall. "I've helped Father rescue many commoners who were infected by the plague, and have been teaching those who wish to learn about herbs. I've made the faith of Mother Earth spread quite significantly in this borough. What's wrong with borrowing the mental terror candle for half a day?" Emlyn raised his chin and walked to Bishop Yutravsky, who he needed to look up at, and cleared his throat. "I have a friend that has a psychological problem. I wish to borrow the mental terror candle." He didn't directly mention his contributions, because his pride didn't permit him to do so. Yutravsky looked down at the priest-robed Emlyn and smiled warmly. "Okay, that's it?" Emlyn was stunned, finding it unbelievable that the bishop would agree so easily. He didn't immediately accept it as he couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you afraid that I'll lose the candle?" Yutravsky replied with a smile, "Everyone and every item has its end. They will all return to the earth, buried deep within the soil and sprout, grow, and bloom, one incarnation after another. That is the fate of all entities. If the mental terror candle is lost, it just means that my connection with it has come to an end. I will need to patiently await the arrangements that fate and mother have for me. Whether the mental terror candle is lost depends on fate, but whether I end up being killed by you is also fate? Emlyn lampooned without asking further. He received the strange candle from the half-giant bishop. Following that, he used the excuse of needing to treat his friend to leave the harvest church. He randomly found an inn and set up the sacrificial ritual. Above the grey fog, Klein once again received the mental terror candle. More than half of the mystical item was burnt, and its surface was covered with what looked like human skin. There were a few warts that protruded out. The candle's wick was very short and was entirely black in color. It was covered in thin, densely packed scale-like patterns. Klein didn't delay, for he didn't wish to give his alternate personality a chance to grow. He wanted to resolve the problem completely while it was still weak, otherwise, what awaited him was the irreversible fate of losing control. Furthermore, the mysterious space above the grey fog would completely screen the negative effects of the combat between the two personalities. Phew! Klein slowly exhaled as he extended his hand to summon the sea god scepter. At that moment, he didn't do any divination because he couldn't be sure who me referred to. The outcome would naturally be meaningless. Pa! Klein snapped his fingers and lit the mental terror candle. Above the pitch-black wick, a flame with light blue spirituality silently glowed, illuminating the palace that looked like a giant's residence. Unknowingly, the environment changed as a cupboard, desk, bunk bed, and gas meter appeared in Klein's eyes. The crimson moonlight shone in from outside the windows, covering every item with a crimson veil layer. This was the apartment where the Morettis had lived in. This was the place where Klein Moretti had shot himself to death. At that moment, a figure was sitting at the bottom bunk, looking at the sea god scepter-wielding Klein with a warped expression. He had traits like black hair, brown eyes, thin built, average-looking features, a rather deep outline, and a scholarly air to him. He was another Klein. This Klein revealed a furious expression as he said, "You occupied my body, and now you wish for my soul to be obliterated? I should be Klein Moretti. You despicable, shameless transmigrator. You parasite." He appeared to have just grown in strength, and he wasn't able to use the objects in the external world. Klein didn't reply as he walked over with a heavy expression. The expression of Klein slowly changed as fear occupied his eyes. His body scrunched up as he pleaded with a slight tremble, "Let me go. Let me go. You snatched my brother, my sister, and my life from me. Isn't that enough? I'll remain quietly in your body, helping you analyze problems and giving you suggestions. I'll definitely not wrestle control with you over the body. Let me go. Let me go." Klein remained silent as he raised his sea god scepter-wielding right hand. The Klein was already awash with tears as he yelled angrily and fearfully, "I only wanted to remind you. If I wasn't trying to remind you, why would I have exposed myself? Let me go. Let me go. I have no ill intentions." Klein silently looked at him and made the blue gems on the tip of the sea god scepter light up one after another. Lightning bolts instantly appeared as they twisted and entangled Klein, like a storm. Amidst shrill cries, the figure rapidly dissipated as a bolt of lightning wiped all traces of it. As expected of myself. To know the soft spots in my heart and which are the most effective ways to plea. However, I've already come to know who I am. I'm Zhou Mingrue, who has fused with Klein's memories and emotions. If I were to let you go, it would be equivalent to splitting the two up, admitting that they are opposing parties. That way, I'll immediately lose control once I return to the real world. Klein lowered the scepter and closed his eyes as he sighed silently. Then, he ultimately maintained his lucidity as he left the mind world. Chapter 802, Follow-up Solutions. When Klein opened his eyes again, the threats and pleas in his mind had vanished. The light blue flame before his eyes continued burning on that pitch-black wick. He seriously inspected the state of his spirit body and confirmed that the signs of chaos were gone. His aura's colors had turned pure and were no longer spotted. It's finally resolved. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and lowered the sea god scepter. With a snap of his fingers, he extinguished the mental terror candle. He didn't immediately return to the real world. He sat quietly above the gray fog as he used the silent palace to calm the remnant negative emotions that his inner heart couldn't vent. After this matter, Klein gained a deeper understanding that the path of a Beyonder was a path that constantly fought with madness. All Beyonders would be pushed to the brink of losing control, or they would have psychological problems if they weren't careful due to internal reasons or external stimuli. And once the symptoms appeared, not resolving them in time might leave them in a situation that would be abnormally difficult to resolve. The split personality that was created was a result of internal and external factors. The cause is a result of me being a transmigrator. Yet, I fused with Klein Moretti's memory fragments and received parts of his emotions. I was naturally inclined to having a dissociation. Together with me trying to steal the Antigonus family's notebook recently, it's akin to me walking along the boundary of an abyss to act as Dwayne Dantes. The stress is immense, so after being agitated and mentally corrupted by the keeper's near loss of control, the problem erupted. As Klein raised his hand to rub his temples, he vanished from above the gray fog. Just as he returned to his body, Klein felt his mind and spirit were a lot more relaxed. It felt like a dusty window had been carefully wiped clean, and the additional faceless potion he had consumed was fully digested. The alternate personality that appeared is really a result of all the past psychological problems. I was able to resolve the problem with the mental terror candle, which is equivalent to receiving a complete and effective psychoanalysis. I wouldn't have any latent risks in this aspect in the short term. However, I need to be constantly taking notes and frequently regulating myself. I mustn't be careless. Klein walked out of the washroom, came to the balcony, and looked at the distant mountains and nearby vegetation. He was in quite good condition. He could clearly sense that his self-recognition and self-acknowledgement had deepened. The constant sense of disidentification had greatly weakened as a result. I never expected my victory over my split personality would bring such benefits. If it wasn't because the generation of another split personality would result in one that's stronger and harder to deal with, I would have wished to split a few personalities, killing myself several times. Klein shook his head with a scoff as he gave a self-deprecating laugh. To be frank, just one instance of a split personality was rather dangerous and unresolvable for anyone else. Since he was aware of where to acquire the mental terror candle, the essence of the problem, and his experience in resolving it in the past, he was able to eliminate the latent risks and not allow his split personality to strengthen itself. Otherwise, the best outcome would be the state in which Bishop Yutravsky was in, and the worst outcome would be a gradual loss of control until it became an inevitability. Furthermore, I still have a psychiatrist as backup. Klein chuckled as he strolled back to his room and sat in a reclining chair. He recalled what he had encountered during the day, and from there, he obtained the points that he needed to take note of in the future. If a mid-sequence Beyonder of the sleepless pathway loses control, they will be able to directly cause mental corruption by pulling others into a dream. I need to be wary of that in the future. Before becoming a high-sequence Beyonder, the rampagers of most pathways aren't capable of doing this. Often, they will mutate into monsters and use the corresponding Beyonder powers to control or attack their targets. It's difficult for them to transmit their corruption. Apart from the mid-sequence Beyonders from the sleepless pathway, the spectator pathway should be capable of doing so as well. When faced with similar enemies, not rushing to wipe them out would really result in a situation where you have no way of defending yourself. Also, although I'm aware of the Keeper's conditions and have figured out their relationship with the core seal, the corresponding problems have arisen. If I were to disguise myself and infiltrate inside, how should I create the performance of being eroded by the core seal and not have my disguise be seen through? Klein carefully contemplated for a moment and was completely out of ideas. All he could do was stand up, walk to his desk, and draw a picture comprising of symbols that implied secrecy and mystery prying. He was summoning erodes. The full-body mirror in the master bedroom suddenly undulated with invisible waves as silver light appeared, forming Loanese text, "Exalted Great Master, your loyal and humble servant, Erodes, is constantly at your service. My actions from before had caused a certain damage to your image. I am very appalled and ashamed. Will you accept my apology? You actually know to admit your faults." Klein scoffed and said, "Don't make the same mistake again in the future." "All right." The full-body mirror presented new words. "How may I be of service?" "There's something." Klein deliberated and said, "The keepers of the Church of Evernight are contaminated by the core seal's power behind Cheney's gate. They are in different conditions from the typical Beyonder. Is there any way to perfect a disguise?" The silver words changed and outlined new text. "Great Master, there's only one method, to sacrifice your marionette and allow it to receive the contamination of the core seal. It will gradually change and become identical to the keepers. Then, you can hold it in your body to fool the core seal. That actually works. It's an idea. However, a marionette that's made from a Sequence 5 wraith can't be bought with money. I really need to pay an extremely high price to obtain the high-sequence potion formulas and ingredients." Klein thought and said, "Then, how do I get the marionette to receive the core seal's contamination?" Typically speaking, a wraith marionette might be detected by the seal before being forcefully purified and dispelled just as it approached Cheney's gate, or even just appear in the prayer hall. The full-body mirror's waves stirred again as it accentuated a figure. The figure wore an old-fashioned veiled hat. She was tall with long, chestnut hair. She was none other than Queen Mystic, Bernadette. "Great Master, you can seek her help," Erodes explained with a sentence made from silver words. "Her Queen Mystic isn't from the Evernight pathway. How can she provide any help? Or does she have a sealed artifact that corresponds to the high sequences of the Evernight pathway, making it similar to the core seal behind Cheney's gate? Thankfully, Admiral of Stars needs a drop of blood from a mythical creature. When the time comes, apart from providing an item that can satisfy Wulaseptin, there's still a middleman fee for me. This will be the middleman fee." Klein thought as he nodded and said, "Very good, you may return." "Yes, exalted Great Master. Your humble servant, Erodes, awaits your next summoning." As a silver line of text appeared, Erodes outlined a palm with a handkerchief in hand as it shook it. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he looked at it, momentarily unsure how to respond. Westborough, within the Odora family's villa. Emlyn White wore a faint smile as he randomly found a single-seater to sit in the activity room. Diagonally across him, another sanguine baron, Russ Bathory, was holding a wine cup filled with blood. He was observing him with narrowed eyes, without concealing his disgust and hatred. Russ Bathory had not only been injured during the hunt for the first primordial moon believer, but he also had Emlyn steal away his spoils of war. "Such an act from you will only please me." Emlyn chuckled inwardly as he turned his head to look at Cosme Odora who had just entered. He waited for the Baron to declare the results and reward him. Cosme forced himself to ignore Emlyn's gaze as he walked to the fireplace and said to all the sanguine present, "I'm gathering all of you today because the final victor has emerged for the hunting competition." "Who is it?" The sanguines looked around as they exchanged looks, guessing at who could have clinched victory. Most of their gazes landed on Russ Bathory, with no one believing that it could be Emlyn White. Only Russ Bathory had a hunch as he looked in surprise at the darn fellow. Cosme secretly sighed and said, "Emlyn White has already hunted 3 targets, automatically clinching victory." "What?" a young sanguine blurted out in disbelief. The sanguine was a race with fewer members than humans. In Backlund, they were all part of a smaller community, therefore, they weren't unfamiliar with each other. Everyone knew what kind of sanguine Emlyn was. Chapter 803, Name Rectification. Amongst all the sanguine present, even if Emlyn wasn't the oddest, he was definitely among the top 10. As a member of a race born with a long lifespan, having one or more hobbies to kill time was common. Emlyn wasn't the only one who liked dolls, but that wasn't the problem. Aside from purchasing new dolls and matching them with new clothes, or obtaining blood from hospitals to drink, he almost never left his home. Nor did he enjoy interacting with his fellow kinsmen. Unless he desired relatively fresh blood, needed to obtain some historical knowledge, or exchange for certain ingredients, he never participated in any of the corresponding gatherings. Such a lifestyle was nearly identical to the aging, high-ranking sanguine who had no choice but to lie in specially made coffins to barely maintain their existence. It looked nothing like that of a fellow who had recently matured. As a result, Emlyn became a topic of idle conversation at many sanguine gatherings. In the years before, people only mentioned it in passing, jeering at him in private, just like the normal gossip about different freaks in Backland. When they heard that Emlyn walked into the Harvest Church because he got lost and ended up being captured and locked up underground by the Mother Earth's bishop, his reputation slid into the irreversible state of being the brunt of the jokes, as well as being a disgrace to the sanguine. Yet, this disgraceful fellow had hunted 3 consecutive primordial moon believers. Those were artificial vampires. Could it be that he had employed the help of the Church of Mother Earth's clergymen? Or did he hire some especially powerful bounty hunters? Thoughts flashed through the minds of the sanguine as they speculated over how Emlyn had clinched victory. At this moment, Cosmic coughed lightly and said, Emlyn has already found the corresponding characteristic legacy and become a baron. Baron. When the members of the sanguine looked at Emlyn again, there weren't any looks of doubt and puzzlement. Instead, their eyes were filled with shock, astonishment, and surprise. For the first time in his life, Emlyn was being stared at by his kinsman in such a manner. He suddenly felt ethereal as his mind was filled with joy. This made him wish to proudly tip his chin and say, all of you should be addressing me as Lord. This satisfaction is identical to me buying a doll I've been saving up and craving for. Emlyn sighed silently as he held back his tongue. He wore a faint smile as he slowly surveyed the area. Then, while buttoning his coat, he got up and walked to Cosmiodora's side. After the other sanguine snapped back to their senses as they looked at the 2 barons with mixed looks, Cosme finally said, the champion of the hunting competition will enter the final list of Viscount candidates and obtain free help for the ritual. In addition, he will also receive a ring created by the ancestor. As he spoke, Cosme took out a silver jewelry box engraved with complicated patterns. Snapping it open, he showed it to all the sanguine present. It was a translucent ring that seemed to be made of light red amber. It had a blood-red gem embedded in it. It was the size of a fingernail and it emitted a faint glow. It's called Lilith's ring. It allows the wearer to be even more charming and always be in the optimal state of being under the full moon. Cosme gave a rough introduction. It can also make the surroundings be under the effect of a full moon, hence, the corresponding beyonder powers will be greatly enhanced. At the same time, it can also project a door that leads deep into the spirit world. Cosme paused and added, this door is the door of summoning. It can let creatures deep in the spirit world use it to arrive in the real world. However, it can only be used once in a fixed amount of time. When spirit world creatures pass through their door, it's equivalent to signing a corresponding contract with the wearer. They will serve the wearer for a specific amount of time, possibly around 5 minutes. If the service period needs to be maintained for even longer, the wearer needs to personally communicate with the spirit world creature to re-sign a contract that's of a longer duration. Under normal circumstances, the strength of the summoned spirit world creature will be equivalent or slightly stronger than the wearer, but there's the possibility of them being much weaker or much stronger. There was once a viscount who relied on this ring to summon a demigod-level spirit world creature. The stronger a spirit world creature's strength, the more they can resist the agreement in the door of summoning contract itself and harm the wearer. If you encounter such a situation, you must decisively dispel the projection and end the summoning. Its negative effects is blood-thirsting disease. You will need to drink at least 1 blood vial of human blood every hour to relieve it. Otherwise, your blood will boil and evaporate. In less than 15 minutes, it can cause the death of a baron. I'm not against that. I do yearn to drink blood more frequently, but the problem is that I'm unable to obtain that much blood. Emlyn held back his joy and agitation as he considered how he could resolve the negative effects. At this moment, Cosme turned to glance at him. The additional blood will be provided by the race. Then the problem turns into the modification of a bottle so as to carry around that much blood. Emlyn scanned the other sanguine who wore looks of envy and jealousy as he asked, "If I don't wear it, will I get the blood-thirsting disease?" "No." Cosme firmly shook his head. Emlyn stared at Lilith's ring and asked again, "If I were to wear it for 59 minutes and take it off, will I get the blood-thirsting disease?" Cosme's facial muscles twitched as he said, "When you wear the ring, you will be inflicted with the blood-thirsting disease. You have to drink 1 vial of human blood to have it subside for an hour. During this process, if you were to take it off and put it on again, the blood-thirsting disease will be activated again. Regardless of whether it's been an hour or not, you'll have to drink blood again. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Of course, this isn't a complicated problem," Emlyn said with a tsk. Cosme retracted his gaze and looked at the other sanguine. "I'll be giving this ring to the champion of this hunting competition, Emlyn White." "Congratulations, Emlyn." He turned and extended his right hand towards Emlyn to shake his hand. Then, he handed over the blood-colored Lilith's ring to Emlyn. "Thank you." Emlyn smiled in a reserved manner. Cosme stopped looking at him as he said to the other sanguine, "There are 2 targets left. They are your prey, and there will still be a reward for them." At 10 p.m., above the grey fog, Klein received Lamino's travels which Emlyn had sacrificed, and he learned of the usage of the so-called Lilith's ring. The other aspects aren't noteworthy, but the thing to pay attention to is the door of summoning which leads deep into the spirit world. Perhaps there will come a day when the one passing through that door is an ancient goddess, Lilith. Of course, many conditions need to be met. As Klein made a bold hypothesis, he flipped open Lamino's travels and checked the Beyonder powers which Emlyn had used and replenished. He used up all of the lightning strikes. Traveling is gone as well. This fellow really doesn't feel the pinch when using the powers of others. He added a Wings of Darkness. It can help the user receive an enhancement in speed and the ability of brief flight, as well as it transforming into a colony of illusory blood-sucking bats to attack the enemy. 1 is full moon. It can make a certain region appear to be in the state of a full moon. 1 spirituality would be rejuvenated and the aspect of death would grow stronger. This is recorded from Lilith's ring. 1 is Claw of Corrosion. It can cause one's fingernails to grow another segment with mysterious symbols and patterns. They would be sharp enough to slice through steel. It would also come with potent corrosive abilities, making it the nemesis of defensive methods like scales and skin. 1 is Animal Sense. It can communicate with animals and control them while also sharing their senses. If used well, this has wondrous effects. I've never seen Emlyn use it before. What a waste. 1 is Abyss Shackles. It's a spell belonging to the darkness domain. It can make the darkness or shadows condense into a chain that controls or restrains the enemy. There's no door of summoning. That's right. It should be very difficult to record. With Emlyn's personality, he would have given up after a few failures. As Klein flipped through Lamino's travels, he used divination and his mysticism knowledge to interpret the new Beyonder powers. Retracting his gaze, he summoned the sea god scepter over, added a few pages of lightning strike. This was in line with his fear of lacking firepower. Then, Klein used the sun brooch to record holy light summoning and holy water creation, allowing Lamino's Travels' Beyonder powers to become more varied. After doing all of this, he closed the notebook and picked up the mental terror candle. After settling the split personality in the afternoon, he didn't immediately return the mystical item. Instead, he had the idea that since it belonged to the spectator domain, it was possible that it could help him explore the sea of collective subconscious inside Grozel's travels. Therefore, he planned on delaying it for half a day before returning it to Emlyn. To his surprise, he found from his research that the mental terror candle didn't have any effects of placating the mind or eliminating negative emotions. All it could do was let one enter the depths of a target's mind, and from there, one could plant a cue or resolve a problem. Phew! Klein heaved a sigh of relief. Through the bestowment ritual, he returned the mental terror candle and Lamino's Travels to Emlyn and Furs respectively. Returning to the real world, he had a comfortable bath, and he read some papers and magazines before heading to bed. Amidst his reverie, Klein suddenly woke up, aware that someone had entered his dream. He saw the scene before him change as the sky was dark and deep. They were adorned with resplendent diamonds that left him awed and serene. A distance away, a singing voice sounded. The ethereal and common voice reached straight into his heart. Meanwhile, the clouds moved as the crimson moon half revealed itself, scattering down its mild glow. All of this made Klein feel as though he had arrived in the Evernight goddess's divine kingdom. In the dream, he felt relaxed and comfortable. This is... Klein suddenly realized the situation he was in. This was the arrival of a Beyonder from the Church of the Evernight. This Beyonder was using the dream to placate the tycoon, Dwayne Dantes, so as to heal the mental scars he suffered in the afternoon. What you are doing only disturbs my sleep. Klein silently sighed helplessly. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.